All right, welcome to Lodestone True North Podcast, episode 006. My name's Mark Whitmore, your host. I'm the head coach here at Lodestone True North, and what I do is back the bus off business owners and put them back in the driver's seat. We talk here about becoming the best versions of ourselves for our families, our businesses, and our communities. If you own or operate an organization, or if you simply want to expand your vision of what it means to master your own destiny for the sake of your family and your community, you've come to the right place. Today, I am reading an article from Harvard Business Review, written by Pat Lencioni, and this article is from a while back. This is July of 2002. The title of this is Make Your Values Mean Something. Take a look at this list of corporate values. Communication, respect, integrity, excellence. They sound pretty good, don't they? Strong, concise, meaningful. Maybe they even resemble your own company's values, the ones you spent so much time writing, debating, and revising. If so, you should be nervous. These are the corporate values of Enron, as stated in the company's 2000 annual report. And as events have shown, they're not meaningful, they're meaningless. Enron, although an extreme case, is hardly the only company with a hollow set of values. I've spent the last 10 years helping companies develop and refine their corporate values, and what I've seen isn't pretty. Most value statements are bland, toothless, or just plain dishonest. And far from being harmless, as some executives assume, they're often highly destructive. Empty value statements create cynical and dispirited employees, alienate customers, and undermine managerial credibility. So today, I am talking with Josh Gordon. And Josh is CEO of Full Spectrum Marketing. He's a client of mine. He's a great friend, father, husband, and all-around good guy. Good man.
Thanks,
I was going to
Mark.
say, that's probably pressing on your Enneagram 6 deal right now.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So, Josh, great to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So we're going to talk about your core values. We're going to talk about your biz. We're going to talk about how you're thinking, how you're running your biz, challenges, good news, bad news, whatever comes to mind. And it's great to have you. So,
Thank you.
what'd you think about that article so far? That's just a little intro there, but
Well, I always like Lencioni's storytelling.
Yeah.
The twist of, but I in a marketing communications role, it's all about ownability. We talk a lot about that at FSM. And so integrity, you should just have that as a human. Like it shouldn't be the core value of a business. That's just part of being alive, that you should have integrity and be able to earn people's trust. Yeah. So, you either have to have a core value that is not unique, but you own it in a unique way, the way you demonstrate it or some aspect of your business, or you need to make something up that is ownable and it can define you. And I think he makes a great point to say, it has to be cultural, and you have to teach to it, coach to it, look back on it a lot, but it has to be meaningful, and you have to put your own filter on it. You have to put your own twist on it to make it ownable.
yeah. Yeah, I think he calls those, some of these are aspirational, where they're not core values. They're more kind of, let's all hope that we aim at that or attain that. And some of it are pay-to-play values where, like with integrity, if you don't, integrity is just like welcome in the door. It's not really, hey, this is who we are. Of course, this is who we are. It's kind of like saying nutrition, or oxygen or something, right?
Yeah.
Folks without integrity are doing time, so they're not.
Whether
good
they know
employees.
it or not.
Yeah.
That lack of it eats
Yeah.
at them, whether they're conscious of it.
Yeah. So you've got some core values in your company that we built a little while back. How long ago was that we worked on your values?
Oh, about a year probably.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a lot of fun. I got to say, so one of yours in particular, I tell folks about all the time. And I've got them printed out here in case you forget them.
I won't forget them. But I got, sub bullets. We got a lot of sub bullets.
Yes,
Me,
you
I
do.
got to make sure I get all the words in.
Yeah. Well, so talk about them. What's your favorite? What's your kind of go-to? So if you're if you're at a bar drinking and you've had one too many and you're like, my core value, my favorite core value is.
And that's a good impression of me. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
The one I talk about the most probably with clients and team members and in drunken bar scenarios is partnership. And for a couple of reasons. One, because most advertising or marketing communications companies, they don't lean on partnership at all. They act as if they know all the answers, and they bill like they're lawyers. So I fired an agency on the client side once that I called with a question, and they said, every time you call, the meter's running. Well, that's not the way I want to be treated. That's not partnership. And so we try to take a different approach, which is, we know what we know pretty well. We know messaging craft. We know delivery mechanisms of messages, so digital or non-digital, traditional kind of marketing communications. We know the marketing side, tiered pricing structure, the 4 Ps, product, price, place, promotion, all of that stuff, brand architecture, and we blend them together. And so we know what we know well as a team, but we don't know what you know well as somebody immersed in your industry. And we can't even approximate that knowledge. So how could we get to good answers and good results if we're not connected as businesses in true partnership way? So we're going to be transparent and show you how we do what we do, but we're going to ask you to say, if we're generating leads for you, you got to tell us if they suck. A lot of agencies will say, we're measuring these vanity metrics and you got X increase in traffic or leads or whatever it is on your website. Did it make any difference in your business? If it didn't, then it probably isn't worth doing. It's just a vanity metric. I have to know, were those leads good leads? Did you close business on them? There's a client that I won't disclose the name of them, but they got leads the other week from like huge companies that came in. And right away we're following up because we follow the leads they get on their website. We get notifications too, so we can interact with them and engage them and say, was this good or not? Yeah. And some of them are really cool. And I want to be there because it reinforces our value as a partner, but it also demonstrates our interest in success and defining it the same way, which is essential, I think, to what partnership's all about. The other part of partnership we talk about a lot is we want our clients to be proud of their work. And that's a difference in, I think, what a lot of agencies do because they're most interested in, well, we're going to submit for this award and we want an Addy and we have all this stuff. We don't submit for any awards. I don't really care. I care if you got more leads. I care if you're established in your market the way you want to be from an authority standpoint and a thought leadership standpoint. That is far more meaningful to me. I would rather have you as a client for life than win an award off of one project.
Would you call it vanity measures or vanity
metrics? Yeah, there's a lot of vanity metrics. A lot of things that people measure and talk about, but it's like cotton candy. You eat it and it dissolves and hasn't satisfied you at all. There's no substance behind it.
Have you? So you're talking about this core value. So you're interacting with a client. You're going on, and they're saying, "Well, yeah, we need a marketing firm," and you say, "Yeah, but we partner. Like we have a core value of partner, and here's what we mean." And is it a? Do you use it as a differentiator?
A differentiator and a disqualifier. And some of that came with some tough but important lessons learned along the way where we had a relationship with a company around the holidays last year that, kind of view marketing and communications as a light switch. Like you can just turn it on and out comes the business. And they kept referring to us as a vendor. And, I've learned that that's an offensive term. Because
does it trigger, I mean, you're like, vendor, red flags, we may be...
Sure. Have you ever gone to a vending machine and next to the 100 Grands and the Mounds Bar, there's a marketing plan. You hit A4 and out it comes. No, you don't vend it that way. Right. That's not what it is.
Yeah, it's a commodity then at that point, right?
And it's not. It's. I think it's really best when it's a partnership. There's a blending of what two organizations know and an interest in learning and going deeper in what they know so you can deliver more value. Because that's ultimately what keeps you employed by them the next month, is if you're delivering value. Value is defined as the thing that is most important right now.
Yeah.
And any business that's going to evolve. And a marketing communications company is wired to be agile in that way. Whether it's a new communications channel, a new market opportunity, something happens with a competitor, you can take advantage of something, you have a new product release, whatever it is, you want to be agile and take advantage of those things. And you can't do that if you're not a partner. If you don't know what's coming down the product pipeline for them, or they don't trust to tell you or think to tell you, how can you really help move their business well? And, we want to have clients for life. If we lose a client, it's because they've outgrown us or there's an unforced error on our end, and our core values are designed to prevent those from happening.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about the business, the history, how you got into it, how you got to where you are now, your history a little bit. You have a really interesting background.
If you say so.
Yeah. No, yeah, I do.
So I started out my career in journalism, and I paid my way through college doing radio, TV, and print journalism in the late 90s, and back before the internet was catching on. And I really formed a fairly agnostic point of view in terms of how people consume information. Some people watch TV, some people read the newspaper, some people consume it through radio, whatever it is, or they do all three, and they're kind of immersed in that. I don't need to care as much about where the message is delivered as long as the right person's on the other end. And so that, for me, was a very formative thing. And you develop this instinct toward, I want to make sure my audience is getting this message, and I'm formulating my own brand as a journalist. And so I really enjoyed that part of it and was able to get my way through college and then spend a year as a columnist and full-time journalist. And I realized for me to get where I wanted to go career-wise, it was going to be a life on the road all the time. And it was going to be very frustrating. You'd spend 6 months learning a beat, ingrain yourself in the community, make yourself essential as a storyteller, and then you've got to move on to the next one because that's how you chase it. You've got to go find a new beat, new opportunity, bigger paper, bigger whatever it is. And as journalism was changing, it didn't feel to me like it was the right time to go deep into that because the gap to syndication was so long and wide. I wanted to have a family. I didn't want to move every 6 months. And, I work for daily papers. So that's 7 days a week, 80 to 100-hour weeks. It's a grind. And I was going to have to make a trade-off there. So I found a job in advertising where I only had to work 70-hour weeks.
I was going to say only 7 days a week.
Right, yeah. But I did that intentionally, especially early in my career, because I wanted to learn everything I could and soak everything up. And I got a job at an advertising agency working on a small car dealer account. And then 3 weeks into the job, there was this opportunity to go after John Deere as a national account at the agency I was at. And it was really neat to be part of this. Very exciting. It reminded me of being on Deadline, covering a cool story that kind of had the same adrenaline flow, which was fun. And we were up against this big advertising company out of Chicago called Foot Cone Belding. And we lost the pitch. This was all above my pay grade. But we lost the pitch, and our president at the time called John Deere and begged them for at least one of the 8 regions. They said, we know we have a good team. We know we can do a good job. We'll give you a severe discount. Let us do this for 3 months and prove our worth. And if we're not worthy of it, don't pay us, kick us to the curb. If we are worthy of it, pay us and give us the rest of the business. And they said, fine, we'll take a reduced fee for a while and see how you guys can do, and we'll stand up 2 teams and really put an effort into it, to John Deere's credit. And after begging 3 weeks into my job, they're like, we resigned the car dealership because we're going after this thing, and it could be a $4.5 million account every year. So we're going to put our eggs in this basket. And so it was me and 5 other folks on the account side, and then a bunch in creative. And we ended up having the whole business in 2.5 months.
Wow.
Because there was great leadership in place. They understood how to do the job really well. And our focus was creating relationships and partnerships with all of the dealers that were in our purview. And I learned a lot of lessons. I was an arrogant jerk and, just was humbled quite often. But I learned some cool things about how to grow something, how to do it the right way, what it takes, the long hours, all that stuff. And then to get the big win was a huge opportunity. And I was able to use that to help grow my own portfolio within John Deere, then eventually work on new business and Sea-Doo, Ski-Doo, and ATVs when they launched their ATV and launched their Spider. BRP launched their Spider, that three-wheel thing. And that was fun. Then worked on Carpet One and was able to get some new business there, which was great. And then we got bought by Madison Avenue Firm. And when that happened, I thought, there's no way we went to having to 3-bid everything overnight because they were regulated by Sarbanes-Oxley, which is law. So we have to 3-bid everything as a legal need through the SEC. Which there's lots of value in that, no decrying that. But when at the time, one of my projects was opening HSBC bank branches on the East Coast. And so I had to 3-bid my balloon vendor. And you had to pay a courier and 3-bid a courier to drive balloons in from 50 miles away because they had the best price. It just wasn't efficient. It wasn't effective. It wasn't smart. And they weren't. It was also new. It wasn't ready to kind of smoothly adapt. And at the same time, our interactive division got shut down overnight because they had other shops that did that in their portfolio. J. Walter Thompson did. And I was pretty sure the internet was going to catch on. So this was in 2007. And I thought, I really want to put some eggs in that basket. I really want to pursue the opportunity to work more on the digital side. And I got a job at a software company that did enterprise-level, sophisticated marketing around profiles. So a universal profile, and then we'd serve content through enterprise-level email, through different content that we'd switch out on the website, depending on who we were, if we knew who you were, mobile marketing, all these things, all built around what the data was. So it aligned with my personal point of view, which is, it doesn't matter the channel, it matters who's on the other end. Well, this thing was like, we always know who's on the other end, and we know what they like, and we're going to share it with them. So I thought, well, I got to help this thing. And so I was hired on there, early on, and that company grew up huge. And then it sold for $25 million. I had departed by then because the journey was great. Great. But we were at term sheet and acquisition with a company where I was going to have to work in Chicago some, and I just had my second kid, and I made a conscious choice to be more inclined toward family, and that being an important thing for me. And so I found a job running client services at an digital advertising and website development company in the area, and I had a challenge with that job, kind of working on the people and processes side of that and really maturing that organization. And I had great leadership already and was able to mature that organization. And it kind of came to a time where my effort there was really ending because a lot of the transformation had happened, and I was able to get a job running global marketing communications for a med device company in Northeast Ohio, which was good for me because, in my journey the second I walked into an ad agency and had that opportunity to go from journalism to work in advertising and marketing, I knew that I wanted to do it. And I knew I wanted to help lead it because I just enjoyed it so much. I was very passionate about it. And so what I didn't have was that big company experience. And this afforded me that experience because I had 10,000 employees. There was a sales force of 1,200 people there. There were brand managers, 8 different brand managers focused on 12 different brands. So there was quite a large organization. It helped me plug in and understand how the client really thinks and understands their world and navigates the internal inner workings, how a project gets sponsored and pushed forward, how to make that argument effectively. And, I was able to be somewhat effective in that role. And then I got a call from a friend of mine who said, there's a small agency. They're trying to figure out how to make this work, barely in 6 figures for revenue for the year. And this is their focus, but we think there's more potential there. Do you have an interest? And I was like, in my dream job? Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. And it's run, the owners, the primary owners of the organization, they've been in business for 125 years. I can't even describe to you how much you learn in that environment. If you have helped build and steer a company for 125 years generationally, there's just so much learning. And I like building strategically. I like building for the long term. And so our values are very aligned. And I was lucky to get an opportunity to take over the business 5 years ago, 5 years ago, April.
So was it 6 figures at that point, the revenue when you started? Wow. Yeah. You're not there now, that's for sure.
Well, we've been fortunate. We've learned a lot of lessons along the way.
Yeah.
And the more we're having more success, the more we're figuring out who we are. And I wish that weren't a messy process.
Yeah.
But it is, and you've got to decide to do it.
Yeah.
And you've got to decide that failure's okay and setbacks are okay. And really the ones that make it, and I don't have a lot of experience in this, just my own kind of personal bias and some of what I've observed, you've got to just kind of brute force it through. You've got to decide that this is going to be successful and there's going to be lessons learned, and you have to be a good person and a kind person along the way. But it's challenging. It's very challenging.
Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. This entrepreneurism stuff it takes some guts. I mean, when you're succeeding, people are envious. When you're not succeeding, people wonder what's wrong with you.
You're a pariah.
And you're broke.
Yeah.
And everybody thinks you owe them, and you thinks you're loaded and you got nothing but debt and strain. And
I love the unsolicited advice.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you just...
Yeah.
That kind of thing,
Yeah.
like you're in the checkout line at the grocery store,
Right.
and the genius in front of you has all the right ideas.
Yeah, who's the janitor at,
And good ideas come from
store.
anywhere.
Yeah.
It's the unsolicited nature of it that can be somewhat off-putting. But for me, that core values part was really a really key moment, because we're getting a lot more right in terms of how we structure the business and the products we had, and building the right talent pool in there and broadening our talent pool so we're deep and wide on that, and building bench strength and all that. So, we're fortunate to have some of the resources to be able to go build some of those things out. But really wasn't until, you look internally at yourself and go, what do I believe and what defines me? And then you look in your organization and go, does this define everybody else too? And you circle the stuff that really stands out.
Yeah.
And then you go, boy, this person really, they're very alike in what we believe. And when you're able to capture that can become magical when it's defined well. And then it becomes something that guides you in sales conversations. It becomes something that guides you in coaching internal conversations and growth conversations with team members. It helps you evaluate who to hire and who isn't going to continue on in your journey. And you sort of feign wisdom with it. You sound wise, wiser than probably I am, far more than I am. But because you're focused on something that's meaningful and you believe in, it's a lot easier to run the org.
Yeah, that's good. So partner is your first core value. And so let me back up. So you 5 years ago, how many employees when you started?
3. I came over with somebody, and then there was somebody there that was a receptionist. And they had a few people working part-time, but they're really in another business. And so the receptionists, talked to them, and they had some talent, so we put them on some different tasks, and the other folks didn't continue on with us, and then we just started to grind.
Yeah. So where are you at now? How many folks on the payroll?
13. We just hired our 14th, and we have a job open for 15. So we'll be 15
And
in
you
the next 30
probably need
days.
like 17 or 18.
And we're probably at the point, and I'm a laggard on this because it's very important that we get it right.
Yeah.
Because there were times where we went too fast.
Yeah.
And too fast, not just in the interview process, but too fast in defining what it is that we needed. And more than core values, but what is the seat in the org?
Yeah.
And then what kind of traits and attributes does that individual need to have to be successful in the role?
Yeah.
And you build these things that you wish you could have done differently.
Yeah.
I wish I'd had more wisdom years ago, because people I respect and I think are talented, I asked to help us grow, and they were great at what they do, but what they do isn't what we needed. And I didn't yet have the experience to decipher that.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the wisdom that's learned along the way, but some of those lessons are tough. And if I'd had core values earlier, it would have been much more clear, for me.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because when we did that project, the core value kind of stuff, we ended up unearthing. I'm keying off something you just said. If I had core values earlier, so we unearthed the ones you already have.
Right.
Right. And that was part of the journey between you and Andrew, your partner, and we looked at former employees or current employees that we really love, and that if we had everybody matched these three people, at least on a character or work ethic kind of side of things. And then we looked at employees and past or current that we don't love, and somebody screwed up when they hired these folks, and kind of do an A/B comparison.
It was me.
It was you. Yeah,
I
you were all
screwed up.
three of them. That was weird.
Yeah, no, I screwed up.
So, and we do a bit of an A/B comparison, and actually that's right out of Pat Lencioni's kind of school of thought. And we kind of unearthed these values that live down inside of you and Andrew and that are ideal. This is how we work. This is how we process. If you work like this, if you have these kind of, I would say like currents, primary currents running through your processor, you're one of us. And I was talking to somebody today, a potential future client of mine, and they were asking about that, and I said, look, it's not about talent. I mean, talent's a big deal. Mm-hmm. But
Secondary.
It's secondary to, I would say, chemistry. And you look at a good band or you look at a good sports team, chemistry or culture trumps talent. You can get real far on talent alone, but a unified team with real heart and soul and chemistry, it kind of smokes talent, and that's really what we're trying to do with these core values or what they end up being is a bit of that, the code to your chemistry. Mm-hmm. To saying, yeah, we are all on the same page. I'm one of you, you're one of me. Let's go. We got this resonance or hum. Chemistry is such a weird thing. If you think of bands, right? The Rolling Stones, or U2. U2 is a great example. The same four guys for however many years
104 years.
100, right. Almost as long as the folks that own your company.
Almost. They're getting there.
Yeah. So, but they've maintained that like vibe,
mm-hmm.
All along the way. And, some of their albums better or worse or whatnot, but the chemistry is hard to argue with, so.
It is the building blocks of the culture. Mm-hmm. But it's only as good as your discipline in introducing it mm-hmm. and living it and adhering to it.
Yeah.
And that includes coaching and all those other things. When we fall down, we skip a process, we don't do something the right way. Mm-hmm. It's because we weren't acting inside of our partnership core value. Yeah. We decided to skip something because the tyranny of the urgent, we felt like we had to get something out right away. But if we'd follow our process and do it the way we know is partnership aligned, we would have been fine.
Yeah.
And we have to stand up and have the guts to stand up for that too, because in our business, clients are very demanding, and we have a lot of clients to manage. We're fortunate to be in the position we're in now. We have 91 different folks that we work with, 91 partners. And if a lot of them want something at the same time, that's a challenge to prioritize and balance. And we never want anyone to feel like we have other clients. So with that as a goal, that really is a way for us to serve and show partnership. There are times where that comes into conflict and people skip things. We've got to reset them and say, maybe what we need are more resources. Maybe what we need are something different, but we have to live true to our core values. And we have to let that guide us. And if we fall down, let's do it by following our core values. Let's do it in that way because everything else around it's solvable because we know who we are and why we're doing what we're doing.
So you're going through the office on a given day. Do you kind of ping somebody and say, hey, that's not partnering. That's not, who we are. Or hey, that is partnering. Look at everybody. The person's doing a great job partnering. And you got some bullet points here that I was going to read off.
Sure.
Delighted by serving, proud clients, humble approach, and great follow through. And that's what you mean by partnering. So do you use these core values to call out folks or
Absolutely.
to kind of say, hey,
Weekly, we do a big one, and daily, we call things out. Just this morning, our client services manager called out one of our account folks for doing a great job in living that partnership core value. They did a really good job taking a project that normally would take 3 weeks with different partners involved, on our side of things in order to create a fulfillment process for a client. We did it in 5 days because the client really needed it. It was a pain point for them. It was a little bit outside of their traditional sort of Marcom thing, but our job is to be a great partner. And so we found a way to do it, and our client is delighted by it and wants to do more stuff with us, as a result of us solving that problem. And if you're too focused on one thing, and we're lucky because we have subject matter experts that lead our different areas. And so that lets our account folks plug in more on the partnership side and say, what's really hurting you in the business right now? It doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be a small thing. Well, we got this one person has to fulfill all these gift cards for this promotion we're running, and it's killing them. And now it's killing us because they're complaining to us. Let's see if we can solve that problem. And we went and solved it. That to me is partnership. That's following through on something. The other part of follow through is there were times where when I was a client, I would email my agency and I wouldn't hear back for a week. Drove me nuts. Drove me absolutely nuts. I mean, I may not have the biggest budget over there, but I think I deserve at least enough respect to say, get back to me within a reasonable time frame, or just tell me that you heard my message, because now I'm chasing you. Yeah. And, we're supposed to be partnering, working together, and I'm having to chase you for answers. Yeah. That's not really, in my mind, fair as a client, because that's not the kind of relationship I want. Because guess what's happening on my side? I got VPs and presidents and salespeople asking, is that thing done yet?
Right.
And what do I get to tell them?
Right. I don't know.
I don't know.
It puts you in all kind of awkward positions. So, yeah.
And why isn't it done yet? Oh, because our partner hasn't gotten back to me. Well, why'd you choose that partner?
Right.
And so this is one of those areas where I think the experience on the client side, and I'm not the only one at FSM that has that, several of us do, but it informs that response where you have to respond within 24 hours or the same day to a client request, all of them. Just acknowledge you got it and you're working on it. You don't have to have the answer right there, but they've got to know that you're there and available and partnering with them. And we've got to know where it is as a priority for you. Because if we can get 2 or 3 days time because we're busy with other things, then we're going to do that. But then we're going to deliver in the time frame that we set, and that's the difference.
That's so your second one here, clear communicator. Tell me about that one.
Well, I know I'm talking a lot, but great communications start first by a lot of listening.
You're talking clearly, by the way.
Well, thank you. I worked on my diction knowing I was coming here today. But it's about listening first. If I don't know what's really plaguing you and I'm not asking tough questions, then I'm not being a good partner. And we have to have this honest relationship where you're telling me that this is really hurting us. This is really bogging us down. And if we screw up, don't not tell me, hold it inside for a month, and then shop us and fire us and never tell us what's going on. Because we can solve the problem if we know it's a problem. And I think there's a lot of inertia built up in this industry where people assume that agencies don't look at themselves in the mirror and go, you know what? We weren't doing a very good job on this. And that's our fault. And we're sorry. And we're going to make it up to you in this monetary way. We're going to make it up to you in this service way. So it starts by listening. And that listening is more than just service. It's also in solving the Marcom problems. Tell me about your target audience. Tell me about how you've been doing outreach previously. Tell me about the success. How do you measure that? And what we hear a lot is, well, we don't know a lot about our audience. We don't measure it in all the right ways, so we don't really know if it's working. And we don't have the measurements we use tied into our business at all. And we know from our experience as a partner is we need to fix that first. But we could only discover that if we listen well. Because now we've taken somebody coming to us and saying, I need a social media, I need a website, I need a this, that. And we've made it a strategic business conversation. And I think a lot of industry folks are reticent to have that conversation. They're nervous to have that conversation because it's not the footing that's most comfortable. But it's the footing that's required if you're going to have a client for life. So it's all about starting that through listening and then being responsive, like I talked about, emailing, calling back, making sure that they know we're here and that we're available and we're being proactive, when we have challenges. And the other bullet underneath that is common language. And that's a really important one. not just amongst each other. I always like the joke, why use a big word when a diminutive word will do? Because it shines a bright light on that notion of just, well, I'm going to be provincial and smart. And a lot of agencies do that. They come down from the mountaintop with all of what you need etched on tablets. And the truth is, that's not how it works effectively. You know a whole lot more about how to implement EOS than I ever will. And I better listen to you, and I better use common language with you and then with your target audience as we're marketing. Because if we sound provincial, or if we become disengaging, we become hard to understand. And there's so many readability tools, and just you can find different language and find the right language and lexicon for that industry and that target audience. And having that viewpoint, and then fortunately for us, we have a wide pool of talent. So we're able to work with folks that aren't just doing what they know how to do, but they're selecting an approach and then executing it well. And there's such a vast difference in that. Well, your target audience reads at this level and they use this kind of language, and we're going to study that first, so we're strategically internalizing how they interact and how they consume information, and then we're reflecting that in how we speak. That is not a common approach I've found, and I think it's an essential approach.
So you're walking through the office on a given day, and you see somebody that is not using common language, where they're talking to a client, or maybe talking to a coworker about a client. And do you kind of key on that? Where you're like, hey, don't forget, we got to clearly communicate with their language at their level, in their swim lane.
Yeah, because I get to review a lot of the creative work that we do. And so in doing so, one of the feedback layers I often provide is, are we saying this in the best way? Are we visually communicating this in the right way? Are we making this as easy as we can make it on the website side of things? And so all of that comes in that way. The other thing we do is we have morning meetings every morning, and we go through the lists of whatever he's going to be working on, kind of in an agile scrum kind of mindset. But then we always call out people that have done a great job with the core values. And in our staff meeting every week, I spend time going through and calling out different team members and articulating different projects and how our core values came to life in those things, because I think it's important to keep them front and center. That's how it becomes culture.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's great. So you got partner, you got clear communicator. Third one here is bold and honest. So tell me about that one.
If your idea sucks, it's fair that you know that. If we know something that you may not know because you don't know what we don't, you don't know what we know and we don't know what you know. If we know from experience that an idea isn't great, now we're not going to tell you in a rude way, because that would violate our other values, right? But we're going to be fearless about approaching you and saying, I think there's a different way to getting at this problem, or we haven't defined the right problem. And I'm a big believer, and I can't remember who said it, so I'm going to not attribute it the right way, which the journalist in me feels bad about that. But there's a quote about defining the problem. And a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And that's something I say all the time. Have we defined the right problem? Because we can't pretend to solve it if we don't know what we're dealing with, if we haven't kicked over all the rocks and asked all the questions. So we have to be fearless in our pursuit of that information, and then thoughtful in how we articulate it. So that first element under there is to be thoughtfully fearless. And then the other part is just the emperor has no clothes. We have to be willing to say that, in our point of view, this idea may not work. Help us understand why it has worked for you before. Maybe there's something we can learn from this. And if they don't really have a good defense for it, it tends to be something that we don't carry forward with. Yeah. So if things are presented in the right way and feedback is delivered the right way, and I mean it has to be delivered the right way in the moment. Because a lot of those things, they have to be muscle memory that's built up. Because you know how it is when you get busy and you've got a couple of phone calls you have to return, there's a couple of texts, your email is stacked up, somebody hits you with a quick hitter and you're like, you know what, I'm just going to fire this thing back. You may be fearless in your response, but you might not be thoughtfully fearless in your response. So those two things really have to be conjoined, because we can't be honest partners if we're rude partners.
Yeah, thoughtfully fearless. So talking about, your aim in that seems client centric. are client focused, but what about between employers, employees, and partners, et cetera? How does
It's
that
the same
play
thing.
out?
No, it's the same thing. We have to be the same way. We have to decide who we are and be that. Because we know that it unlocks good relationships, and we know it unlocks long-lasting relationships. A lot of these things are built out of how do you have a long-term relationship with somebody? If you're oriented on
Right.
partnership and being
Right.
together for a long time,
Right.
then
Yeah.
that's what's in your mindset and that's what you're thinking,
Yeah.
because we want you as a client for life.
Yeah.
So we're not going to sacrifice some short-term thing for a long-term relationship. Quite the opposite. And I always like a story that I like. I like classic. I like comedy. I study comedy. I like comedy. That's like a little side hobby I have, and I share that interest with our creative director, Mark Morelli. And so we'll talk about classic comedy. And one of the heroes, the old question, what are the 5 people you'd have dinner with, dead or alive? One of mine is always Jack Benny, because Jack Benny made silence funny on the radio. How do you do that? He was a vaudeville guy. He grew up that way. He was a wannabe violin virtuoso that he turned into a joke. And there was one moment in the mid-'40s when they're at a table read with the guest star, Bing Crosby, huge star at the time, noted crooner of the Torch kind of big band era. And they were at the initial table read for the script. And all of Jack Benny's cast became very well known. And so it was custom at the time where the star of the show got all the jokes. They were the one doling it out, and they became the big star, and that's how it went. Jack Benny wanted to do things a little bit differently. And so at the table read, there they are with a guest star, and he said that joke would be funnier from our singer, Dennis Day. That joke would be really funny if Mary Livingston said it. That wouldn't be funny if Rochester the butler said it. And so as they're going through this script, he's giving away all the best lines. And then taking all the lines that make fun of himself. And so after this session, Bing Crosby pulls him aside and says, "What are you doing? I've been on all these different shows. Nobody does it this way." And he goes, "Well, I think we'll get laughs and we'll be on next week." That's somebody that's willing to do a little bit of sacrificing in order to keep the long-term game in play. And I think that is how to run a business. Why are we focused on making sure we make this thing at the end of the month or whatever it is, or taking this on? We need to be thinking about how do we partner with these folks and align to help them grow for the long term. And if we get to a point where we're not able to help them grow, then they need to listen to a different show. But as long as they're with us, we're going to give them the best lines and the best stuff because we don't care about the credit ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I've noticed about you. I mean, not to pump you up necessarily, but you've always been really, really passionate about your clients. You've always been very, I would say humble in a sense that, I mean, I think it's technically humble to be like, hey, I'm not here for me, I'm here for you. It's
Right.
you're offsetting that kind of passion, and that's really cool to see. I mean, a lot of my clients are like that, where they're not. Well, actually, I mean, I suppose somebody that ends up hiring a business coach has a bit of a ability to kind of go, okay, I'm kind of screwed up here, or they maybe have a need for some sort of objectivity. They've already gone that first step they've humbled themselves enough to say, yeah, I need some help. Or
They
some
value
direction.
objectivity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's always been interesting to watch you just pour out your enthusiasm toward your clients, and I can see your employees catch on to that too. So that's cool.
That's part of the partnership thing, and it's part of being on next week.
Yeah. So bold and honest. So we got partner, clear communicator, bold and honest. The next one is my fave. So tell me about that one.
These are no particular order, I guess, but the next one is one we made up. And so the word we use for it is furiosity. And the idea behind it is
that
to
in
be...
the dictionary?
It is not TM FSM. It is not in the dictionary. But the idea behind it, I think, is important. And that is to be furiously curious about finding out the answer. And this is true on the creative side and researching target audiences and those things. And it's really true on the digital side too, because I've worked in digital agencies, I've hired digital agencies, I've fired digital agencies, I've tried to hire people from other digital agencies. And what you find is they all lack that furious curiosity to find out why something is the way it is. They end with what it is, not how it got that way. And on the client side of things, this was mortifying to me, where it was like, geez, all your numbers are down. See you next month.
Yeah, here's the bill.
But that's a lot of what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Or there's very high-level passes at what might explain it. Well, what happened in your market?
Yeah.
Did the competition do something? No one's ever looking at themselves and going, what's wrong with this construct that we have?
Yeah.
What if we just changed the lens and poked holes in it?
Yeah.
Would we be able to find different things? And are we, A, willing to do it? B, do we know how to do it? And C, are we effective at pursuing that stuff? And I promise if you look hard, there's stuff there. There always is. There's always learning to be had there. And in a lot of cases, it unlocks big opportunities. There's a client we've had for 4 years, and they're a large org, and we found through curiosity and applying that, which we celebrated at our morning meeting, we found some insights on the deep technical side of what was happening on a website that unlocked better ad release through Google. And they had 160% plus month over month increase in leads, valid leads, for several months.
Yeah.
Because of what we found, because it just wasn't good enough to see that that was that way. We had to understand why. And it's really hard, especially on the digital side, because it's intentionally murky from some of the people that hold all of the cards, Google and Facebook and so forth. So it requires, and this is part of me, unfortunately for some people, I suppose, having been a journalist, because I'm A, skeptical, and B, I'm not willing to accept your first response. I have to understand it. I have to know why, and you've got to support it. And I have to have two sources. You've got to prove it. And that's become part of our culture, is we've got to go figure out the why behind something. It's essential, I think, to having success and knowing why you're having success, because the difference between a professional and an amateur is that professionals have success on purpose. And if we don't know why things are the way they are, how they're working, we're a bunch of amateurs. And I'm determined to not lead a bunch of amateurs. We are professionals. We're good at what we do. We can walk with that confidence, but we have to, that confidence is earned, and it's built by knowing what we know and by researching and understanding. It's not built on top level knowledge and guesses.
Yeah, no, it's good. When you hire like a law firm to do something, or a CPA, or a marketing firm, classically, you end up, what you're paying. You get that bill. You get the
Like clockwork.
Yeah, right. That communication never falls through.
Right.
But then when you say, what are you doing for me? Like, is this working? Crickets. It's like, I'm not really sure how well it's working, but I know how much it's costing. And it's...
Agencies sell, marketing companies sell expertise in units of time. But clients buy deliverables.
Yeah, right.
And so, though that always has to be reconciled, and I think that is something that is different in just our posture and our approach as a company, and that's very specific to our core values, because we are built as partners. Everything we do is built, it's ingrained throughout the organization. And so things like that are sort of easy to overcome. They're natural and part of our way of doing business, just because of how we're built and how we work. Because the other part of that curiosity thing is urgency, and urgency to be great. We want to be a great partner for you. So if you call us with a problem, we're going to investigate it. We're going to figure it out. We're going to tell you what happened. Bold and honest means we're going to own it if we screwed up, and we're going to have a solution for you that's fair. And we're going to clearly communicate what that is and what happened as a result.
Yeah, I love it. when we cracked that loose, it was I remember we were tossing around curious and furious, and somehow those two words just collided, and it was fun to see that pop out. It's I'm always pushing for my clients to end up with unique, sticky phrases that have a little bit of, it's hard to let go of that phrase, and that has a implicit meaning that you're almost like, wait, that sounds like that's something really unique, and there's a lot there. What does that mean? And it kind of draws folks in, and one of the
because we say, well, you're too intense. I've heard that feedback before.
Yeah.
I've heard it from bosses before.
Right.
Oh, you're too intense.
Yeah.
But now,
yeah.
But I have learned what works.
Yeah.
And not knowing the answer never works.
Yeah. Well, and in your space, for sure, to be, and I would argue that this curiosity or intensely curious is also strategic. It's kind of saying, wait, there's a why here. There's a bigger purpose. There's somewhere you're trying to go. And it seems like this marketing campaign isn't going to take you there, or this, this scheme on your website, or this message, the message that your website says, or whatever else you're, delving into on your messaging. It's not, brother, it's not saying what you're trying. It doesn't mean what you think it means, right? And Vincini, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. And I realized just as you were talking that I think that is a strategic bone, this curiosity piece. And it's a missing piece in the professional services world, it seems to be.
Services, but business in general, I view it as highly ownable, going back to what we talked about initially when our conversation started. Because having worked in the corporate world, having worked in an org with 10,000 plus employees across the country, there's a lot of people intent on finishing the week and not finishing the work. Mm-hmm. And curiosity demands that you finish the work.
Yeah. I like that. You've spouted off some good. I love it. Agencies sell times, clients buy deliverables. That's money right there.
It's true. It's true. And they don't care if it takes you an hour or 100 hours. There's a value they'll put on that. And that makes the traditional method of lawyer kind of billing tough, which is why we don't do it that way. We have a special way we do billing and that side of it, and it's very value-based pricing, value-based approach.
Yeah. I gotta believe that nobody likes the hourly billing. I mean, I
depends on what you're used to. There's people that are accustomed to it, and they have mastery or perceived mastery over how to get the agency to do what they want to do. And I've learned to be better at recognizing that when it happens and avoid those situations, because that's not a partnership. Partnership, even down to our value-based pricing and our billing processes and all those things, if you get something and you're like, I don't see the value here, we've got to prove it. And if we can't prove it, we're losing money. So we better be documenting things a certain way in partnership. We better be communicating, we better be forecasting. We better be sharing what's coming up so we understand it. We've got to deliver on what we promise. So there's things in here that are, I think, just part of our culture as we built this up over the, I hope no one's reading this or watching this and going, well, I'll just steal what they're doing. I guess you could. It's nothing, it's not rocket surgery, as my brother likes to say. But the truth is that it's all stealable, but it's really hard to make your DNA. It's hard to make it muscle memory.
Yeah, right. Yeah, none of this. It's like, hey, just hit the ball, throw the ball, catch the ball. That's not hard.
Simple sport,
right?
Why are you making it so hard?
That's right. That's right. So, humbly confident. That's your last one, and it's. Tell me about that one. What does that mean to you?
In part, it means don't mistake humility as weakness. We believe in what we do. We have certifications, we have case studies, we have great client experience. We have people that work on our team that are so accomplished, written books, worked in New York, done big things. But we don't go in with that swagger, and we don't go in with, all of our awards behind us on the shelf. When you walk into our agency, the only awards that you see are the awards we won for design for the soapbox car we built.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that. I love that. You walk into your lobby. I don't know what you call that. Foyer, whatever.
Ooh,
Yeah.
foyer.
That's one of those. What'd you call that $5 word when I can use?
Yeah, an accent.
Yeah, right. But that was cool. That car sitting there on its own. Very, very cool.
That is an award that's way more about the client.
Yeah.
Soapbox Derby than it is about
Yeah,
us.
Yeah, that's fun. That's fun. So, Humbly Confident, and I remember as we were kind of spinning around this in a session, you wanted to be able to say, hey, we know what we're doing, but we're not arrogant. We're not those folks that, need to kind of blow in and blow sunshine all everybody. Hey, look at me, I'm awesome. But to have a bit of a soft-spoken, it's almost like you got the stick behind your back, just kind of like this. Hey, I'm really something here, but I don't need to show it to you. I don't need to, kind of toot my horn. So I love it. I think that's true of you guys there at FSM as well.
I think not just agencies, but a lot of businesses. It's true at agencies, though. A lot of them are driven by one or two people, but it's really about the team. And as a leader, if you're not working hard on getting all of the team to be great, to work toward mastery and mastery toward growth, if you're not driving that, then you're just as good as a couple of people. And if you can't work with those couple of people as a client, you can't build a long-term relationship. And the best compliment I always get is, it was all right meeting you, but when I got to meet your team, they're incredible. That is the best compliment I can ever get.
That's great. Yeah, that's really good. How many sports teams have we seen that in, or bands, where there's some phenom kind of superstar at the center, and everybody else is just a side dressing.
Did you watch The Last Dance, the documentary that ESPN just did? They do those 30 for 30, I think, documentaries. So there's this 10-part series, I think it was 10-part series, called The Last Dance. It was essentially the career, but sort of the downfall of the Chicago Bulls. Remember the Chicago Bulls in the 1990s? I lived outside Chicago at the time. I grew up loving that team. And when Jordan was drafted, a lot of people don't know that, but he spent years languishing because he was a complete rock star on a dreadful team. Dreadful team. And they struggled. They had all kinds of ownership issues. They had GM issues, people going in and out. GM came in, kind of settled things down a little bit. Owner believing what the GM was doing. They were reinforcing each other, helping each other. And then they made a subtle draft pick of a guy that nobody thought really a whole lot of, out of a Division II school called Central Arkansas, a guy named Scottie Pippen. And they draft him. And, watch this documentary series. It's worth the time investment. But what you get to learn is, Michael Jordan, this enormous talent, was nothing until he had a team, until Phil Jackson was there and had a set of core values and the things that they believed, and they all believed and were aligned on and lived and coached to. And then Michael Jordan internalized them, and then they won a championship. Yeah. And then they understood what it meant to be a champion, and that breathed so much more life into what their core values were. Yeah. And then they go on this three-peat run, and then for reasons I won't spoil in the documentary, Jordan plays baseball for a while. And I was in 7th grade at the time when he did that, and it was an English class. Mrs. Gessler interrupted our lesson to put the news conference on to watch that. That's how big of a deal it was when he went to do that. So he leaves, and then, of course, he wants to come back. And when he comes back, they end up doing the same thing. To me, it's like a great lesson in what it means to have core values and learn what being a champion is. Because once you know that, it doesn't leave who you are. You build all those strands of DNA. But it comes to a certain point, in sports, I think, where it becomes untenable because of contract situations, because of entitlement issues, or ownership wanting to move on. Seeing the business side of it is different than I can't pay all these champions what they want and have a team next year. Right. Yeah, I can have 4 players, but I can't have a whole team. So, at some point we're gonna have to make some trade-offs, and things naturally evolve. But it's a good lesson in being a champion. It's a good lesson, I think, in somebody in leadership inculcating core values, people internalizing them, living them, being them, and then having success with them, and then watching it run its course longitudinally. That's an interesting thing that we don't get to do a lot, because everything's about what's happening in that moment. But this is it's a good life lesson.
Yeah, that's good. Have you read this book, The Culture Code?
Not yet.
Have we talked about it? Yeah, last few episodes of the podcast, I have talked to a few, used different sections of it and talked to different people who have read it. And it has so much great stuff in there about, there's a good deep dive on the Spurs. What's his name? Popovich. Mm-hmm. And their culture and kind of how they do what they do. It's interesting being in the news lately. Old Popovich has some things he had to say. So interesting stuff. But so there's so much good examples in this book of cultures that high performing cultures, and how they put these kind of values like yours, at the center of, hey, this is who we are. If you're not like this, we're not going to like you. You're not going to like us.
It's just not going to work out.
Yep. You might have the wrong team if you're not, these kind of 5 deals. It's interesting. Sometimes when I talk to folks, try to get them to understand because we do have a context for core values naturally, but a lot of times it's a kind of a foreign language when you first start talking to a business owner or a can-do person.
It sounds like a bunch of hokum.
That's right.
To use a 1920s word.
Yeah, you're like, well, can't we just do a good job and fire people that suck? And well, yeah, we can.
Core value. We have core
Touchy
values,
feely.
but what are you doing in the work?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, and you may have had this, I'm sure you've had this experience too, but when you go over to a buddy's house, you're at school. And this is, I don't know if kids do this now. My kids don't. I don't know if your kids do, but my kids are older. My youngest is 17 right now. So, but when they were little, when I was little, talking 5th grade or something like that, right? 10, 12 years old. And you go over to your buddy's house after school. And you kind of roll in the front door. Your antenna are out, right? You're like,
new experience.
Yeah, you're like,
taking it all in.
What are we allowed to do here? Do I got to take my shoes off?
For you, is what are we allowed to get away with?
That's right. Well, but you start looking for the edges. You're like, where
are the boundaries?
What sort of folks are you? Are we praying before dinner? Can I run around outside? Is it okay to put my feet on the furniture? Do we watch TV all the time? Can we hang out in your room? Do we just throw stuff around and laugh and play, or do you got to be quiet in the house? So you got an outside voice, inside voice. There's these different kind of like codes, like, hey, this is who we are around here. We don't do that here. And I just remember getting burnt a couple times, just kind of like, oh, shoot. Like, I do that at my house, but we can't do that here, or the other way around. Usually it was the other way around, where like, cool, you could do that here. You can't do that at my house, but we can do that here. So like watch TV during dinner, or just kind of those kind of the rules of the organization, so to speak, the unwritten rules.
You always had that friend that could watch R-rated movies.
Yeah. Like, before, hey, Mom, can I go to his house again?
Yeah.
Right?
What are you going to do? We're just going to watch a movie.
We're going to play baseball or, whatever.
Yeah. No, you're so right, though, that is that feeling out period.
Yeah.
There's a board member at my company. He has a great saying. he doesn't mean it literally, so it's a great saying. He says it takes you a year to find the bathroom. And I like that because it's exactly what you're describing. You know, when you enter an organization, especially at a leadership level, there's something there. And you can come in and impose yours if that's your mandate.
Yeah.
Or you're going to come in and learn and get the rhythms of it. And that really can take 60, 90 days. And you can sprinkle little bits of your belief in there as things go, so it's not a surprise if you do end up taking a 90-degree turn later. But it does take you a while to find the bathroom, to just find that rhythm for how people work, how they communicate. I mean, I've walked into organizations that are deeply in email. And you tell you what, we're going to copy you on every email. You're going to learn us in the first 200 emails.
Jeez, kill me now.
You would not enjoy that. But if that's their rhythm, that's their rhythm. And the thing that, because I moved, I've moved 14 times in my life. So if there's one thing I've learned, it's you got to assimilate. You got to kind of plug into what people are doing and figure that out. Your analogy is really good when you walk in the door to that. You're figuring out what their rhythm is, and you're figuring out how to apply what you do within what they do.
And there is a code. I mean, it's a thing. It's palatable, right? it's just not written down.
If you're observant.
That's right.
Or you're unobservant or immune to what's happening around you, and you're bullish and you're willing to impose whatever it is you're doing. But for me, and there's people with strong personalities, and I don't have probably a strong personality, but it's a respect thing. And I've learned this because that's something I was not good at early in my life and career, and I can always get better at, is being willing to observe more and see what's the rhythm of this? How do you guys communicate? How are you doing this? Let me plug into that rather than impose something on you. Because if I'm doing that, then that's arrogant. And I don't need to be arrogant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things you see in this book is that great cultures aren't accidental, that they're highly intentional, and they come down to one person. They come down to somebody just going, all right, this is how we're going to do this. And they just own it and stand on it. And, in families, in many organizations, including families, there's kind of default culture, where the asylums are running the inmate institution, right? The inmates are running the asylum. And that's probably the place you want to go hang out when you're a kid, right? You talk about the R-rated movies and all that. But there's a sense, and you see this in the culture code, that great businesses do not happen accidentally. Great cultures don't happen accidentally. Somebody at the center has to say, okay, this is going to go different. This is how it's going to be, and have the backbone and the steel spine and the thick skin and the clear eyes and the sharp mind, and the soft heart to be able to say, here we go. And if you want this to be different than the way I want it to be, you're going to have to kill me. You're going to have to rip me out of here. That tenacity is a common denominator in all these great cultures, and I see that in you. I think you've got the tenacity to drive this culture. So it's been a lot of fun to.
Well, I appreciate that, but I think you wouldn't. I mean, it's not me. You'd see it in the team, and how they approach things, and when it's not there, that's when it needs to escalate, right? But everybody should be living that. In the organization.
Now, are you sitting folks down? And I don't mean to. I mean, you gotta maybe on a HR legal side, you can't say a whole lot about.
I'm going to tell you every employee, their name, address, religion,
social security number,
security number, list of
race,
fears,
right?
Yes, all of it.
Right. But are you sitting folks down around these values and going, okay, look, we screwed up. I am, editorializing, right? But we screwed up when we hired you. It's our bad. Let me be humbly confident here and say, yeah, we screwed that up. You're not one of us. And we should have figured that out. But you have a nice day. Here's your pay
You have
slip.
to do it, and it's hard to do.
Yeah.
It's hard to do in different cultural moments. There's a pandemic, and those are the things that I think if you're human, it eats you up. But the organism of the business and the DNA, the values that drive it, has to supersede all of that stuff. That's your duty.
Yeah.
I think as a leader to enforce that way of being. And if there's folks that aren't contributing or living those things out the way you know what good looks like, you have to have those conversations and you have to send those messages. And then eventually you have to decide that the way we're going isn't the way you're going.
Yeah.
And
that's
honestly,
interesting.
it's something where maybe your values aren't our values and we miss something in the process of bringing you on. And that happens. Some people interview well and they're good mirrors. They're good at saying, oh, you believe this, and so I believe this, and I'm going to convince you of that in this hour and a half we have together. And if you think about it, the whole process for hiring, it's a high wire act, especially as you define this stuff more and more. And there's no way you'll ever get every hire right. Some people are just really good, or they tug at your heartstrings and you like their story and you think, I can help them. Maybe a wiser person than me wouldn't have as much of that, but I still have a little bit of that. And it's hard when it doesn't work out, but it's the right thing to do to protect everybody. To say that this is who we are. We're not going to change who we are because this person isn't living it the same way.
Yeah.
And if we've had those conversations that, our quality has to be to this, bestest standard, that's what being a partner is all about. And if we fall down, we've got to own it. And if we're not owning it, and if we're not shooting for that standard, we're not being the partner we could be. And if we're not being the partner we can be, then we're not being FSM. And if we're not being FSM, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So we've got to decide to go, and you need to find a place that better matches where you're at. Because where we're at, it's not where you're at. When those things don't fit, it's not fair
Yeah.
to try and make you fit, because it's
Right.
going to be full of tension and discomfort. And
Right.
you don't deserve that. You deserve to do something that you can do and excel in and feel great about.
Yeah.
And this isn't going to be that. So go have a great experience and a great life at your next thing, but this thing isn't for you.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about Pat Lencioni and his conference, the unconference he called it, and it was an unconference for sure.
Your kind of thing.
It was awesome. It was wonderful. But he had a crazy lineup of great folks. Alan Mulally, among others, the CEO of Ford, former CEO of Ford and Boeing. But one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking is he had two of the executives from Southwest Airlines, and he's worked with Southwest for years at some level. And he also had the manager, I don't remember his name right now, of the Rams. Is it the Los Angeles Rams? They've changed.
It's the
a couple
Los
times.
Angeles Rams now, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. What was it when I was a kid? It was was it not
St.
San
Louis?
Diego?
St. Louis?
Was it the St. Louis Rams?
think so.
Before that, there was somebody else before that. Some
don't know.
other Rams.
I just know they have the ugliest throwback uniforms
Yeah.
in the NFL.
Well, so the these two ladies were and I don't remember their titles. One of them was people. I think one of them was talent development or something like that. Culture, HR training. I think it was training. Anyway, they sat there and talked about how Southwest hires people, and they have this. I don't know. I call it a flywheel, but just like a rhythmic, circular process. And as they were talking, I'm like, that's mine. Like, I mean, I do that too, or like I try to get my clients to do that, I should say. And just like, hey, this is who we are. The first part of the wheel or the cycle is then the first step is this is who we are. We're going to sit down with you and just tell you our core values. That's the first event in our interaction as a potential hire. And then you're going to go home and think about what we told you about our core values. We don't care what you're good at. They don't even talk about their skills until after they hire them. I'm pretty sure. I mean, it was just way down the road. They said they hire for culture and then they train for skills.
Yeah, and that's driven by, I think, Herb Kelleher, who's the founder.
Yeah.
And I love Herb Kelleher.
Yeah.
He has a great quote where he says, I tell all my people we're in the service business and it's incidental that we fly airplanes.
Yeah. Well, one of the ladies said, no, we do that with all our positions except pilots. So,
right.
Cool. Yeah, cool.
There's a certain level of competence that's required
Yeah.
to get in the door.
So-
but if you have the skills and the
Yeah.
core values
Yeah.
and the culture fit, boy, that's a home run.
And they don't have any time period in there either. So they as they're going through. So first is, hey, this is who we are, and in my own kind of wheel, this is who we are. Second step is, are you us? We want you to come back and then say, this is my interpretation of your core values, and this is how I think I embody your core values. And that's kind of the second steps. The third step is, are we sure? Which is, all right, so let's see your references. Let's talk to your grandma or whoever, like, hey, my neighbor says I'm a great whatever. And kind of a lot of folks start right there, like, show me your references and that sort of thing. But then it's a little bit of a investigative HR side of things, looking into your are you, but it's still around those values, which is, do you embody who we say we are? And then the fourth step is, let's find out. So we'll give you a pass to come and work with us for a short period of time, 30, 60, 90 days. And we're going to kind of like see if so far we've all been right, that you are one of us.
Validate it.
Right, validate it, right? Let's find out.
Trust but verify.
Yes, that's right. What was that? Reagan, right?
He gets credit for it.
He gets credit for it.
I think Truman said it first.
Yeah, and you know who else? I wonder if Deming said something about that too at one point. He said, in God we trust, all others must bring data, I think is what he said.
Yeah.
So anyway, so then the fifth step in that little flywheel is welcome to the team. And it's a bit of a celebratory, hey, we're so glad you're here. You're one of us now. There's an interesting book. I have it out on my bookshelf. Thou Shalt Prosper. What's his name? Daniel Lapin. Rabbi Daniel Lapin. Interesting kind of, I don't know, expansive conversation around why the Jewish people tend to prosper in a direct opposition to their numbers and abuse they've endured over millennia, right? And it's really interesting. He says, well, here's these 10 things. Here's these 10 things about our culture that make us different. And he's not trying to say they're better or worse or whatever. He's just like, this is just the truth of our culture. And one of them is every kind of, I don't know if it's believing, not necessarily believing Jew, but cultural Jew, gets ceremonially welcomed into their culture at 13. Bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, I think is the other one, right? The girls. And he said that has a huge impact on continuing their culture. So that fifth step in the flywheel is ceremonially welcoming folks to your team. You could say hazing or any other kind of like funny, not like in a bad way, right, or criminal way, but just, that kind of, we're gonna do this thing to you because we actually want you to be one of us now. You know, you got to go through this bit of a
Not only that, you've earned it.
yeah, it's a vision quest almost, or now you get the feather, you get the the locker or the number on your jersey or whatever. Now you're one of us, and we get to bleed together and celebrate together and cry together and all that. And there's something really powerful about and I would say there's low hanging fruit in that area where we actually miss the profound nature of being welcomed to a culture. We long for that,
It
as
elevates the
humans.
importance of the culture.
Yeah.
It elevates that it's important,
Yeah.
and then it grants a sense of belonging.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's like, who are you? Well, I'm, and then you spout off your name. Like you haven't.
It's my favorite question to start. We're talking about hiring. It's my
Yeah.
favorite question to start an interview with, which is very simple. Tell me about yourself. And I think it has a lot of power in it because how people choose to answer is so revealing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to run you through my resume.
Yeah.
Okay, so does work define you?
Yeah. Facts and figures.
Do you have no hobbies?
Yeah.
Well, this is the kind of person I am. And if you don't mention work, do you care about what you do at all? So there's always ways to interpret that thing, but I love studying the answer to that question. And it seems, I'm sure, to a prospect like a total layup, but it's really not. It's a very revealing question because it catches you off guard right away. And then you have to think about, how am I actually responding to this? And for me, when I'm doing our core values screener, if I'm seeing some of our core values spark in your answer, I'm going to ask the next 2 or 3 follow-up questions on that because I want to know how you're living that out.
So tell me about your Enneagram deal because that's interesting. And I just made a note about that. That's something I want to ask folks like, hey, what's your Enneagram number? So I know you're a 6, right?
I'm a 6.
And what's your
the moniker is a loyalist.
wing? Isn't there a wing or what's the side?
So the way it works, and it's really hard to describe, I would recommend everybody go to Google and look at the Enneagram visual on there. There's a couple of good websites out about. There's an Enneagram Institute that's pretty good as a sort of a root sort of place to start. The 6 is the loyalist, and the Enneagram is all built. It was built by, I think, Aztec monks, a few hundred years ago, maybe over a millennia ago. I can't remember the exact date. But the idea behind it is it's based in Christian values. And so the idea is there's really 9 core traits that manifest in every person. And of those 9 core traits, they're all rooted in some sort of fear. And the fear is connected to your core motivations. And the reason I like the Enneagram for business and life is because it really doesn't BS you at all. It's like, nope, this is your fear. Whether you try to qualify it, whether you try to shade it, it is that. And it's not good, it's not bad, it is. And it's up to you to decide how you're going to live it out. And I'm lucky as a loyalist of being afraid of almost everything. But really, it's not that. It's about a fear of instability and a fear of insecurity. So that's like, and I wanted to come on here and tell you all of my deepest, darkest secrets. So I'm glad we've gone to this. But the idea behind it is to say, like, which is why our core values are our core values and our purpose is our purpose, and the way our vision is and the way we're going is because it's driven by this idea that why fear? We don't have to fear. I don't have to fear that stuff. If we orient ourselves on preserving a relationship and building together over the long term, I've neutralized that fear. I'm not worried about it. And the whole point of the Enneagram is to identify what it is, but not accept and succumb to it, to understand how to learn to wield it. And like any of those tools, it is as good as what you do with it.
Yeah, sure.
But the idea I like about it is I can learn it, and then I don't have to, apologize for it. I understand how I'm driven and how I'm wired from the factory, and I don't have to succumb to it. I don't have to even compensate for it. I can make choices that help drive me beyond that notion. And so that's what I try and do. And then because it's in this circle, there's numbers 1 through 9 all around it. And so there's numbers connected to it, and those are called wings, and they may manifest more than others, one way or the other. And where I really started to learn this was through my wife, Tara, who is a phenomenal person, objectively probably the greatest person on earth, who is an amazing teacher, an amazing mom, and just human. And I've learned so much. We spent a Saturday reading a book together about this and just going through different prompts, because I always struggle with these things because I overthink it, right? I overthink it, or I'm like hip to it because I've done the Strengths Finder and I've done the DISC and I've done all these things. So I kind of know what you're getting at, and I know how I'm going to engineer the answers and all that. And this one is like, nope, doesn't matter. Like you either agree with this or you don't. You have to decide. We don't care.
Yeah.
So it's lack of apology is for me very appealing and also very revealing. And so we just went through this on a whole Saturday afternoon, and I felt super convicted by it in all the right ways. And I said, yeah, that's the thing that I battle is indecision or overthinking or those things, is because I really don't want to make a mistake, because if I make a mistake, I upset the apple cart and I've created instability, and I don't want to do that. I want to guard against that. So to me, that's the value of it. If it's all about how you use it, like any of those tools.
Does Andrew at the shop there, does he understand your Enneagram angle, and kind of does that help him to
deeply, viscerally?
Yes.
In fact, we made a significant hire on our management team not too long ago, and he's been awesome. And as we started working together, the very first day I sat him down after a 6-week courtship, and I said, I want to talk to you for an hour about all of the things I suck at. And we went through like a very long list that really could have been longer. We could have spent more time on. But the whole idea of it is like, these are all of the things I'm terrible at and I need help with. And, to circle it back to Andrew is a number that is a certain angle for me, where we're connected by the way the Enneagram diagram is written. Ennea means 9, gram is diagrams, right? So that's what Enneagram means. And so 9 is what Andrew is, and he's a peacemaker. He wants harmony. He wants balance. And when he is in his happy place, we've created equity and balance amongst the different people in there. So he is a phenomenal decider and a phenomenal integrator for that innate reason that he has. And he's a great partner for me because all of the natural fears that bubble up inside of me, he will smooth out. And wouldn't you know it, my wife's Enneagram number is also a 9.
Interesting. What'd you say 9 was?
Peacemaker. And I like this device so much. And again, it's just, there's a lot of these things out there, but I like this one because it forces you to face your fears. And that's very in line with our core values. You got to know yourself to be great. And it's looking internally first to say, what are the things I need to overcome? If you can't look at yourself and feel humility, you're not probably doing it right. And so we're doing this workshop through a local organization, which I love, heart-to-heart communications.
And what's the name of the guy?
Jeremy Lyle.
That's
Jeremy
right.
Lyle.
That's right.
Phenomenal guy.
I need to connect with him.
He was trained in the Enneagram by one of the first people that interpreted the Enneagram from a different language into English. So this guy, really knows this. One of the people kind of close to understanding it really well.
Yeah.
And so his understanding of it, so he's putting our whole team through a workshop over the course of 4 weeks where it's paced out really well. And the first part is really understanding your number, learning to embrace it, own it, not apologize for it. And then, walking through in the context of business, what does it mean? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for others? And then how can you work together even better as a result of everybody understanding your core drivers and the things you're worried about? Like the 5 is worried about not looking like they know the answer. So that's a core fear of somebody, a core driver. I love that trait in a subject matter expert. I love that trait in an account manager because they're going to be researched. They're going to be prepared for meetings. They're guarding against that fear. They're biased against exposing it. So when that happens, you're the EOS principle of right people, right seat. That's where I see a convergence. One of the many convergence points is, well, if this person is naturally driven this way, then they're probably going to fit really well in this role. And I know that we can help them be successful and work toward mastery.
So do you look at the Enneagram stuff, do you use it to help you identify the right folks in a recruiting or managing?
I would love to. The challenge I have with it is that a lot of people don't know about it yet. Yeah. And so it becomes, that's why I want to put the team through an experience with it so we can start to get some ownership over it. We have another thing we use called the predictive index that's much more aligned. It's good. It's much more aligned with behaviors.
Yeah.
The reason I like the Enneagram so much is it's at core underlying motivations.
Right.
And so it's a little bit more revealing, a little bit more certain and strategic. But the behavioral thing can be very revealing too.
Yeah.
And I like that in our process because our first thing is let's screen you for core values.
Yeah.
We don't do it just like Southwest. I really like that example.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn from that. But there's things that when we do the PI next, and that informs some of the next questions.
Yeah.
Because there's certain things we know that are attributes of people that are successful in this role. And if they're not at the surface, we need to understand why. And if they're not at the surface for a good reason, because that's not who you are innately, then it's probably not going to be a good fit. And the last thing I want to do is bring somebody on board that's not going to work out.
Yeah. It's interesting, going back to Lencioni and his conference, one of the things he said that you made me think of just now was he said you need to figure out weird, wacky ways. What do you call that? Alliteration, right?
It is.
Wow. So
well done.
Wonderful. To
We're gonna take that out in post, right?
Yeah, right. Okay. There's no post here, buddy.
No.
So to do strange things to unearth what's inside of somebody. So he said things like fly across country on a trip with them. Go coach, do a little league coaching, go shopping. Those are three of the things I had just read this in my journal the other day. I was at a wedding, and I was uninterested. There came a point where in those kind of scenarios, I pull my journal out of my bag and just kind of just in case, because I'll start making little notes and do some processing when I'm in those kind of scenarios where I don't, the phone is uncool, and the phone's a bad way to do your best thinking anyway. So, or any kind of thinking, probably. So anyway, so I'm flipping through my journal, and I was reading through some of my notes from the Lencioni conference, and he had said, do some of these things to help unearth what's inside of somebody. And he had a client. This was a nonprofit, if I remember right, and that they had a person that was they hired to kind of act as integrator, as president, really, probably, and somebody that's meshing all the functions of the biz. And the principal went shopping with this person 2 or 3 or 4 years into their relationship, and things were going sideways. And as they went shopping, it became really, really clear why this person was the wrong person. And Lencioni's like, why don't you just do that as part of your hiring process? Put some of those things in there that knock people off balance a little bit, where you can kind of pop the hood, and see what's really in there.
And how you do that matters so much.
Yeah.
Because it has to be in a situation where the person feels unguarded.
Yeah.
Where they can really be themselves. Yeah. And the challenge, I think, in a leadership role you have sometimes is you create these circumstances wherein you might do that, but the person is sort of projecting what they think you want to see depending on the scenario. Right? So you talk about in the context of the Southwest Airlines thing, maybe it's in that first 30, 60, 90 days where they feel like, well, I'm hired. I can let my guard down a little bit.
Yeah.
That's where it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. So what are you reading these days? What's on your I know you have a lot of very diverse interests. So I
do.
wanna see what do you got cooking?
I got a lot cooking. I have 2 stacks of books in my house. I have one on my bedside table, which is 5 books high, and then I have one on my bookshelf in my office at home, which is 7 books high. And that's really the waiting list. You know, that's the what's up next.
That's the queue, kind of?
The queue. And I'm really excited about some books in there. There's one in there, I can't remember the author, but it's called Range. And it's all about being a generalist in a society of specialists. Because there's a lot of people that focus in on getting you pigeonholed into something, and you're lacking diversity in your thinking, you're lacking diversity in your approach, and you're lacking shape and context and levity in your idea. Elevating it, making it really robust and
is that
full.
A desk stack or a bed stack?
Well, currently it's in the bookcase stack, but it's in the queue.
neat.
The other one I'm excited in the queue is called The Soul of Shame, which my wife read, and it's all about.
You told me about that one.
The nature of why people feel ashamed or shame, and I love it because it's not just personally revealing because you can read it through that filter, but it's also helpful in the context of creating marketing communications and understanding audiences and buyer behavior and motivations and those kinds of things. It can really help you understand, not in a way where you're keying in on it and wielding it and trying to provoke it, but in a way where you're wanting to create Marcom work where people see themselves in it in a good way, in an aspirational way. That's kind of one of our areas of focus. So I'm really excited to read that book. But what I'm currently finishing up, I'm reading Get a Grip.
Heard of
right
that.
now, which is an EOS book. It's really good. It's
So is that a bedside book?
It's a bedside book right now, and
so is the bedside book like that's the
immediate
batters,
read list.
That's the batter's box. That's not the
they're
undecked
batter's
circle.
box. The undecked
All
circles over in the office.
Okay, all right. So Get a Grip.
Yeah, Get a Grip.
How you liking that?
I like it a lot. It's written in narrative form, so it's really accessible, but it still manages to be kind of dense and instructive. I don't mean dense in the sense where it's not smart, but dense, it's weighty.
Yeah.
You know, it takes a while, and this may be just the way I read, but it takes a while to get through a page, and I'm rereading things, and there's call-out checklists and stuff. And I'm dog-earing pages. I'm underlying stuff. I'm writing things in the margin. So that's kind of how I read, and so I don't get through stuff quick, but I like that one a lot. I'm finishing up Vivid Vision,
cool,
which I find convicting and challenging, but I'm enjoying it. And what it does a good job of laying out is why vision's important, but then how to actually go about the business of creating it.
Yeah, coming across it, right, unearthing it, whatever.
And not even like you're just waiting. Like I love the movie The Blues Brothers.
Yeah,
you know when they're in the back of the church. And Jake just gets the light shining on him, and he starts doing cartwheels down the aisle. He's had the vision. That's not really what it is.
Yeah.
It's more like you're taking these core values, you're taking these things that are definitional, and you're mapping them out. And you're talking about, this is what I think I want to look like in 3 years and 5 years.
Yeah.
And now what are the building blocks to getting there? And how you work in with your team. Now, there's certain things I don't love about it because the author is like, you take your vivid vision and I want to own a Ferrari and a ski lodge and all this stuff, and you share it with clients and team members and all. I don't love that because it's really hard for me to want to build you a ski lodge.
Right.
I like you a lot, and I'm not selfish, but like I got 4 kids. I'm on a foundation board. I got things I got to do that I care a lot about.
That's right.
And I can't worry about your ski lodge too. Because I'm a 6, I'm a worrier.
Yeah.
So I can't take that
on.
on.
I think it was Whistler. He wanted a place in Whistler, I think it was, or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
which is awesome. And God bless, I hope he gets it. And he did get it because he wrote a great Vivid Vision. He's a super smart dude.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where I'm taking a lot of stuff from, but there's parts of it that don't really align with my core values and who I am.
Yeah.
But I like it a lot. I'm working through it. So I also chair an educational excellence committee at a community foundation I'm on the board of. And so I'm reading a book called Absentee. And it's all about a study written by scholars and people with PhDs that have studied how different communities have worked on alleviating or really working toward eliminating the problem of absenteeism, chronic absenteeism in school. Because people focus a lot on poverty, which is valid. There's a lot of things that go into why certain kids don't perform well in school. And absenteeism has long been dismissed as kind of a symptom and not a root cause. And this book goes deeply into it and reveals some really shocking things, which is in the education circles, absenteeism wasn't really studied until 2016. Like studied and tracked and measured. And so how can you put programs into place that really focus on getting kids there and treat that as like a really important problem? So we're treating all these symptoms, and absenteeism is sort of this journey of being absent, a journey of it's a symptom to it's a root cause, and understanding that and how to make the school essential again as a centerpiece of a community. So how do we deliver healthcare services through a school? What are the reasons kids are absent? How do we knock those barriers out of play and make the school essential, not just to the kid, but to the home? Because schools have been attacked and they've been eroded in terms of people's belief in them. And so they're not seen as a hand up anymore the way they used to be. You know, that notion of just focus on your education, get through school and you'll be okay, isn't as present culturally as it once was. And how do we get back to that notion of school as essential versus school as occasional or mandatory, you know, versus willful? You know, I want to do it because I see it as part of what makes me the person I want to be. You know, so I'm studying that really hard because I really like working in communities that have a lot of poverty and have these challenges. Because I feel like it's kind of like when you shovel the driveway, you can see your progress as you go. And I like working on really challenging problems, things that are really hard to figure out. I like spending the time to immerse in that and figure it out. So I'm reading that. And I just finished Daniel Pink's Drive, which is a great book. I love Motivation 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and that whole construct and idea. And that's blending into my absenteeism. It's blending into the Enneagram and the vision, vivid vision, and the Get a Grip and all that stuff, because all of these things layer. And I think that as your information diet, you know, I'm big on, I always tell my kids this, your inputs become your outputs. And so the information you take in becomes what you naturally talk about. And after a 20-minute conversation with one of my kids about the latest Mario game that comes out next month on the 17th, and how it's a callback to this previous version and this previous version, you're going, this kid has a very prescribed information diet, you know, which is great. Learn how to build an information diet. And then later in life, I'm going to teach you how to put different information as part of what makes you feel full. You know, but I love that notion that Daniel Pink talks about in terms of how people are motivated and why. And it crosses all layers, you know, of my life as somebody who works in a foundation, as a Sunday school teacher, as a business leader, as a client partner, as all those things, as a husband and a father, brother.
So that's 4. You said you're 5.
Well, I read a little bit of the Bible every day.
Where are you reading right now?
Proverbs.
Proverbs is my favorite dang book in the Bible.
It's so good. It's so good. And, you know, you kind of have to get past, you have to read it a lot because you kind of have to get and parse past and sort of like, okay, once again, they've said, don't commit adultery. I understand. It makes sense. I feel like I'm good on that one. I know not to do it. I'm not doing it. I'm cool. But there's so many more layers to that. And there's these little quick hits where if you really study it and read it in depth, you'll find that you're just kind of reading along, and there's this one chapter, and it's kind of saying, using this arcane language, and then bam, there's this thing that hits you in a way that never hit you before. Because some of the other context in your life or other stuff you're reading, you're building synapses that connect, and you're going, oh man, I get that now so much better than I did. So I really like to read. I like to read a lot of different bits of it, but I really like that one.
Chapter 9, there's this statement, the woman folly is loud. You know, I have I don't
agree with all of its views on culture, and you know, that's some of those things that you kind of have to just push past and get past, because there's a lot of wisdom in there that's good, and some of the stuff that is okay, well, this was written a few thousand years ago.
Sure. There's in chapter 9 there, so I do a little bit of, I don't know if I have I given you a copy of my book? I have a book on it's called Man Oh Man. The tools and tactics on the trail of biblical manhood. And I pull apart, I use various chunks of scripture to, and have some tooling that I use to just like, hey, here's a great way to figure your crap out, you know?
Yeah.
And Proverbs 9 is, so I have Proverbs 2 and Proverbs 9 are my faves, some of my faves.
Mm-hmm.
But probably top, you know, where if you're like, hey, dude, we're going to shoot you, or you could, you know, trash Proverbs, I'm like, fire away, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, but there's, it's this, the woman, wisdom, you know, wisdom has built her house. She's hewn out
Right.
her 7 pillars. She, you know, calls out at the heights, etc. And there's this formula. There's this like, I mean, formula's too cold, but there's like a pattern, a rhythm of just enlightenment almost.
Wisdom
You know,
postured as
yeah.
a teacher,
Yep.
which I
Yep.
think is really cool.
Yeah.
And a maternal teacher, which I
Yeah.
think is really appropriate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Female for sure. And there's just like this rhythm, this awareness. I call it the awareness rhythm, where you're kind of going along, and then, you know, she has sent out her maidens. She calls at the heights. All who are naive come in here. I've set my table. I poured my wine. I prepared my food. Come and eat and drink and forsake your folly and live, and then proceed on the path of righteousness. I'm like, wow, there's like a thing there. There's a rhythm
Yeah.
there. There's like a little pathway of enlightenment or awareness. And you could genericize the whole deal if you wanted to, but say, you know, there's a point you're going along on your path and you're like, hey, I think I need to pull off here, you know, and there's this little kind of voice or impulse but it's kind of like the voice of wisdom calling to you as you're plodding along. And it says, you know, while you're on the path, while you're on the street, while you're on your journey, at the heights of the city, you know, she calls out and you come in and it's all set up. And so there's this table and there's food and there's wine, you know, and the food, the bread is, or the substance is like statements of substance, statements of rich, meaty material that you got to chew on. And you're sitting there gnawing and chewing, and like it's
hard to chew.
Yeah, it's content.
Sometimes it's hard
Yeah.
to digest.
Yeah.
Sometimes
But I
it
think-
hurts going down, but it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's gonna fill you.
That's right.
It's gonna give you the nutritional
Yeah.
value that you need.
But I think of it as text. I mean, it's like statements or truth or text or statutes or, you know, whatever, just meat, right? But then there's the wine, which is mystical. You know, it's inspirational. It's the muse idea. It's the spirit. It's this thing that's like, I don't know where the heck that just came from. You know, it's just outside of me. You know, and but it's inspirational where you're going, oh, you know, and you're mixing that with what you're eating, and kind of getting inspired, you know, and then so it's meditational. It's the kind of the profound. And then there's a third part, which is forsake your folly and live. So you go hit the bathroom. Like you're like, all right, there's some stuff here that doesn't belong, you know, and I ought to leave that behind and kind of leave my folly, leave behind the stuff that I think about
The
or
waste.
that I do. It's just not worth having. And actually, if you hold on to it, you're going to die. You know, it's just going to kill you. It's poisonous. And then you go off on your journey, you know, and it's a 3-hour, you have this 3-hour event, you know, where you're like, you know, I need to sit around and think for a little bit. I need to sit around and chew on something meaningful and have a bit of an inspiration and leave behind some dumb thoughts, some dumb ways of thinking, some bad habits, some bad
Get the rust out.
processes. Yeah, clean out the rust and the
That's
dust.
not mine.
and
That's
just
somebody
go.
I get to work with. He
Yeah.
always says,
Yeah.
you got to get the bad ideas out because you
Yeah.
got to get the rust out.
Yep, sounds like Mark Morelli.
It is a Mark Morelli.
Yes. So I love it. I love Proverbs, dude. And chapter 2 also is there's like a I call it the wisdom bottleneck. There's this like at the top of your head, there's this bottleneck, which is, gee, I need to get smarter. I need to get I need to open that bottleneck up. It's actually more like a funnel where there's a bottleneck at the bottom where there's wisdom kind of pouring in, but there's this constriction at the bottom, which is you, dude. It's like your head. And how do I open that thing up so I just get a little smarter, a little healthier? And there's a killer, just the first 11 verses there, killer kind of rhythm or formula to like, hey, this is how you open up that wisdom bottleneck. We all need to have an epiphany. This is kind of I guess I would say the operating theory of my practice is, hey, epiphanies are really expensive, but the wiser you are, the cheaper you find them. The wise find epiphanies for half off. And it's just like, man, how am I gonna open up that bottleneck, get a little smarter, quicker before I die? So
I love that idea too of wisdom looking down on you, kind of watching, going, oh, okay, you're gonna try that.
Yeah.
It's very humbling.
Yeah.
And it's really good to have that perspective. And I like Proverbs because you get to glance through the eyes of wisdom a little bit and look at yourself through that mindset that you get immersed in.
Yeah.
And it's very convicting. It's very revealing.
Yeah.
And it's very important.
Yeah.
To me, it's been a really helpful way to work toward humility with it, because I don't think we're born with it naturally. We have confirmation bias in everything we do, right? Well, I figured out how to do this, so I'm great and it's great. But the truth is it probably isn't, and you didn't figure out for the first time. And getting that different perspective is really useful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's great. So you got these 5 texts. So maybe one of the things I've asked some folks is, what are your desert island? Hey, you can only take 5 texts, 5 bound texts. So no, you can't take like the encyclopedia or the Babylonian Talmud or or something like that. You could take 5 bound texts and you're on a desert island and that's it. You're done. Nothing else. I mean, as far as books go.
Boy, I knew you were going to have one in here that you just weren't going to prep me for and just pop in. I'd be like, I wish I'd prepared for that, because if you knew a lot about the Enneagram 6, we are a people that like to come
over there
prepared.
freaking out, aren't you?
No, I'm just like cycling through. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to answer this right or well. I mean, obviously I would take the Bible because it's always on my bedside. So it's got to be there. There's some books I've picked up along the way that are really good, and I really like, related stimulus and unrelated stimulus, things that are related to exactly what I'm trying to look for and achieve and build, and things that are outside of it, but I can relate back. So, one of the books I like, I mentioned Jack Benny earlier, is Sunday Nights at 7, which is I'm going to call it a pseudo autobiography because it's written in part by him, but it's unfinished because he died of pancreatic cancer really earlier than he should have. And it was finished by his daughter, Joan Benny. And it's just a really good perspective of him as him, but then somebody else writing from a different point of view and talking about what it was like to grow up in that house and what it was like to see all these stars over at their house, because it was Friday night and they're having a cocktail party and there's no TV, there's no nothing. They're just all being talented together in a room. And there's no shame, there's no uncertainty. They're getting up, they're trying stuff. There's a welcoming atmosphere, and just that point of view, you can just learn a lot from that culture that was built that little 9-year-old girl watched unveil before her.
Where did they live?
Beverly Hills.
Really?
Yeah, Beverly Hills. But you just learn a lot about somebody that learned to have mastery in something and put the work in and the grind and all the difficulties they went through and what that was like. And great lessons in humility. So I love that book. I love that book. I love the book Robinson Crusoe. And I don't know.
That's cool.
Yeah, I don't know why I fell in love with this book, I guess as a kid, but it's something I've always hung on to because here's this dude put in this situation he is ill-equipped for, not ready for, underprepared for, and he's just kind of got to figure it out. Back to your analogy you talked about earlier of walking into the house and feeling out the culture and the rhythm of that house. He had to do that and survive. And I think I always felt compelled to that as somebody that moved a lot, but as somebody that you're learning to assimilate and learning to build up your own thing in any situation you're in, any circumstance you're in. You walk into a business for the first time that you're meeting with somebody and you're getting that same thing. And learning how to adapt, evolve, and thrive is really interesting. And I always thought that was a really cool study for how to do that. There's another book I like a lot, a historical book I like a lot called Rubicon. And it's a study of Caesar crossing the Rubicon. And I like it. It's not a business book per se. It's a great history book about, the Roman culture and empire and all that stuff. But when Caesar crosses the Rubicon, everything that sort of led to that moment, and then you swim in the decision for a while. And look at it from a lot of different points of view, and then you see him go across and what it means and how it changes so much. And, thinking about what are those decisions that you're encountering in your life that are Rubicon level decisions and how you approach them and the thought and the counsel you keep and all of that stuff. I like that idea of the Rubicon, and I've always found history to be very instructive in that way. I've always liked that. I think if I were to go deeper, I'd have to go look at my bookshelf and wait for things to spark out at me, because there's so many different books I've read that I really enjoy. A book on competitive positioning is really good, and but there's books on persuasion and the art and science behind persuasion, on how to fascinate people or why people are fascinated. There's all kinds of things that are totally fascinating to read and really drive you, and just start to build up this little, another layer of sort of, this is aligned with who I am and how I'm driven, and this makes sense. So there's been a ton, but those three stick out to me in this moment.
When, I know a lot of folks like to ask those kind of questions, your top whatever. I have a buddy, Brandon Kenny. We camp together a lot, and that's one of the things we'll talk about around the campfire. Is like, all right, top 5 albums. If you could only take 5 albums on a desert
We've talked
island,
about this.
or 5 authors, or we've gotten into, if you could only take 3 things to drink, or it just.
I love them. They're good prompts,
it's fun.
and they're very revealing.
Yeah. But I read a book. My dad was a 5th grade teacher for years. And he had a book that he would read, all his kids would read, called, I don't remember the author, but it was The Endless Step. And this gal was a Polish girl, this is post World War II, or post Germans. And the Poles, there was this whole German thing, and then the Russian thing, or Soviet thing. And her family got stuck on a train and shipped off to Siberia. And she was a young girl, like 12 years old or so, and wrote a memoir, an adolescent book, essentially, later in life about that time.
Experience.
And one of the things that, for me, as a kind of a, reformed prepper, I suppose, maybe not reformed, I don't know. But as I'm looking at that going, man, because she's just telling the experience of doing all that. And I'm thinking, man, too bad they didn't think through that a little bit more, and put a little of this or that, like a shovel or some work gloves or some boots or a better coat, or things. There are all kinds of things they threw in their suitcases. They kind of knew the time was coming, that they were going to get shipped off, but they didn't really know what they were in for at all. But if you knew, like, holy crap, I got an hour and I got room for 5 books, and 3 albums, and you know what I'm saying? It's just like, dang. Well,
So,
that's
yeah,
right
I
in
would
there.
have a go bag packed with extra copies of those things.
Yeah.
But yes,
Yeah, it's funny. Mine change all the time. I'll be going through my day. I'm like, you know what? That's a bad. I mean, I'll just be chewing on it while I'm driving or something. Oh yeah, I'm taking that book out and putting this one in. So I don't even know where I'm at right now. I mean, I probably have a C.S. Lewis book.
oh, Screw Tape Letters, so
yeah.
good.
Oh, yeah, it's a good one. I have a Tolkien. Like I think the Lord of the Rings. I have a version of it that's all in one big giant. I mean, it's this thick. So I'm like, that's going in there. I read that annually.
Do you? My
pretty
13-year-old
much.
has the same book.
Yeah.
The big thick one,
Yeah.
like the compendium that
Yeah.
has the Hobbit and
Yeah.
the different,
Does it have the Silmarillion in it as well? Silmarillion.
I'd have to go look. I don't know.
So a good buddy of
I
mine.
have not read it, Angela.
Yes, he loves this. That's one of his faves. I asked him that. He's like, "That's in there, Silmarillion." I'm like, "Dude, I can't get through that one." But he's really something. Jeremy Pryor, episode 2, by the way.
All right.
So
Self-plug.
yes.
There's another one I thought about too, just now as you're talking about that. There's this great book, what is by Pulitzer Prize winner named Joseph Ellis, who's a historian specifically on the Revolutionary period in American history, which is something I really find compelling because it's so like full of aspiration and inspiration and hypocrisy that it's this interesting study and contrast of all these people that want to do the right thing, but they're dragged down by the conventions of society. Everybody wants this really aspirational declaration of independence for all men, but they also are owning slaves. And it's this sort of mind-boggling, approach to how to build a society that's very human. And there's elements of it that are like awe-inspiring, and there's others that are criminally revealing of the nature of man. And so it's, to me, a very interesting time period to study. But there's a book by Joseph Ellis, won a Pulitzer Prize for it, called Founding Brothers. And it's the study of like 10 different vignettes, 10 different circumstances, including people that are thought of as founding fathers commonly. And you really go in depth and you study this like moment in their life and what it meant on both sides, and you go very deep, and the language is very dense and meaty, and it's just extraordinary. So you study everything from formation of things to like Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton to Washington's farewell address, which is probably the most prescient thing that's ever been written by anybody who's been in leadership in the United States. Because if you go back and read his farewell address, he was not a great writer at all. He was a jock. He's definitely not, a nerd. But it's tries to be eloquent, but it's really more at the time, and the language choices are very precise. And he ends up forecasting all of the things we're dealing with now when he wrote his farewell address in 1798. And so it's this really cool thing to go back and look at. And so this is just the study of that amongst the context of these other 10 milestones. And I like those kind of books. I have a book like that about World War II and the leaders that were involved in that on the Allied side and the different decisions they made and so forth, that these that mark the milestones of how our society changed. So I like those kinds of deep studies of moments. The same way like my favorite creative meetings where we talk for 30 minutes about a word. Let's swim in that. Let's understand that and get it from all angles. That's going to be really revealing.
Interesting.
If you keep me here long enough, I can think of another one. Right?
Oh yeah, no, I get it. I love it. That's good stuff. Yeah, I talking about George Washington, I got turned on to a little while ago, maybe 5 years ago, to his Thanksgiving Day address. And didn't realize the historical truth of Thanksgiving as a holiday. I mean, I grew up in America and got educated in the public school system, which is a bit of a brainchild of Woodrow Wilson, among others. But And I didn't. So this whole thing, Thanksgiving Day is the first national holiday of the United States. I think it was 1790 something, right after the Constitution was ratified,
which was in
signed.
1787, I think.
Yeah. So when they kind of finally signed it all and like it's a thing and aren't we all happy, he did this Thanksgiving Day address and they made Thanksgiving a holiday, and the purpose was to thank God for the Constitution. And the Thanksgiving address shows all that. And you're like, how come I never learned that in school? I got the turkey thing and the pilgrim thing and the Indian thing, but nobody ever said anything about the Constitution, And there was this time period around the early 20th century where the progressive folks started to pull the Constitution out and like, man, we got to kind of like undermine that thing a little bit. And that's when it shifted to, hey, let's make this about the pilgrims and which is a good thing and it's all cool stuff, but that's not why we have the holiday. You know what I mean? And I'm like, that's interesting. But the Thanksgiving Day address is beautiful, by the way. And so every year at Thanksgiving, that's kind of our little tradition now, is I read the deal, and we're all in tears by the end of it.
Yeah, I'm sure,
because it's a beautiful. He has, and you're right. Washington has a weird.
It's an odd cadence.
Yeah,
I have a leather-bound volume of his writings.
Yeah,
which I have to be the only one because no one's like, well, that guy's eloquent.
Yeah.
But he's interesting because he's very precise in what he says. Yeah. He doesn't take, and it was common at the time to use a lot of sort of contextual, flowery language to make a point of things. Yeah. But I always liked, Twain. I'm sorry this letter is so long. If I'd had more time, it'd be shorter.
Yeah.
And I always think Washington was one of those guys that was like, you know what, I'm going to really put only the time I need to put in this, and I'm going to squeeze the air out of it as much as I can to make it concise.
Yeah. I read a great book about him called The Real George Washington, I think it was. Can't remember the name of the author now. It's a few years ago. Big, thick. But it's almost all letters of his and goes into just his philosophy and thinking. And it's fascinating.
He's an interesting guy. He's an interesting guy. Yep. And really a lot of those guys were interesting guys.
Yep.
And the magic of that moment in history where all of these people with really different points of view and entry points into society in a lot of ways, backgrounds and so forth. And still, even amongst that, pseudo diversity, there was still a complete lacking of real diversity in their thinking and what they went about doing. They didn't factor in a lot of society. They factored in what they were familiar with and what they were guarding against, and it didn't go any further than that.
Yeah. Well, and just, context is a big deal.
Huge.
And they just, I think we're doing our nation a disservice by undoing context and looking backwards and going, oh, bunch of white rich guys. And like, well, maybe, but you can't. There's a fact there somewhere, but there's some other facts we're kind of leaving out. Like with Washington, there's a famous statement of his. He hated he hated the dealings in human flesh. Like he absolutely hated slavery. He owned some slaves, but he inherited his brother-in-law's farm, which had slaves. He never bought a slave. He never sold a slave. And he kept those folks on his property to protect him. And you see that in some of his writings. And set them all free at his death. He's like, hey, and it was kind of a beautiful thing, the way, at least the context, as you see the context of it.
Well, and it's encumbered by the conventions of the time.
Yeah.
He was one of the more courageous people. Yeah. He is sort of a prototypical first responder mindset. Yeah. Everybody's running away, and he's like, I'm going to run toward that thing because I think I can help. Mm-hmm. And you would look at a guy like that and think, well, certainly he'll have the courage to say, this is not right,
Yeah.
slavery.
Yeah.
This doesn't line up with what we're about and what we espouse, and I'm going to just take a stand.
Mm-hmm.
And he just succumbed to the conventions of the time and wasn't willing to do it until he wasn't around to be accountable for it.
Yeah.
And so one of the most courageous people of the time still lacked
Yeah.
the courage
Yeah.
to stand up for what he knew was right in that way.
Yeah.
You know, again, that's why I love that period of history. When viewed through the right lens, it's so revealing
Yeah.
of human nature and our capacities and shortfalls.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's like looking at history, we're all a bunch of armchair quarterbacks, you know. Going like,
That's the
wow,
main
you
job
know.
of a historian.
Yeah.
Is
We
to
would've
tell
done
the
that
exact
different.
story, but
Yeah.
then to be like, well,
Yeah.
you know, bring modern day context into it. You're going to,
Yeah.
there's judgment inherently woven into that.
Yeah. I just finished reading Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Sounds light.
There's some good jokes in there. So
Is that by Irma Bombeck?
Yeah. Man, so my buddy Jeremy, who I interviewed on episode 2, talked about, I'm like, you know, I've been meaning to read that for a while. So, dude, he rattled off a string. I mean, I was like, I quit writing 7 books ago, dude. I mean, I don't know what the heck. He is just a well of information. But anyway, Man's Search for Meaning. So Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist and spent 3 or 4 years in Auschwitz during the war. And the book wasn't really about what it was like to be a prisoner of war or be in a concentration camp. He lost his wife and his parents and his brother and like day one. And, you know, there's this really poignant, he's sitting there going, hey, you know, I just want to figure out where my wife is. And the guy next to him goes, look up at you see that cloud? Do you see that smoke coming out of the chimney? He's like, yeah, that's them. And you're like, oh my gosh, like that just, and he talks through his emotional stuff. And, but what he gets at is, and it's the same thing as this slavery thing and all that. There were, you know, you look at the Nazi stuff, or you look at the Chinese stuff, or you look at the Soviet stuff, and like, hey, why didn't anybody do anything? Or don't you think somebody could have done something? And he kind of is like, you know, everybody kind of did something. You don't have a whole lot of wiggle room, and nobody really, you can't see forward, you know, no, you can't see into the future. We can look back and say, yeah, I woulda, or I shoulda, or I coulda,
Or you coulda.
somebody coulda,
Judgmentally,
right, or they shoulda, so they suck, or whatever. But he does a great job of just saying, you know, you gotta kind of find meaning. And a lot of people don't. There's just a lot of people that just don't find any meaning. And he kind of quote, I don't know, kind of made up some stats during that time, but he's like, there are very few people that don't he said, the one thing that nobody can take from you is your attitude, as your outlook.
And it's a choice.
That's right. And he watched these people hold on to their attitude right to the end. It's like you can take your food and your clothing and your freedom and your dignity and your spouse and all your family members and everything, but you know, and right up to the moment, your last breath. But ultimately, you can't take your attitude, although you can give it up. And one of the things that was really interesting in that book, the worst people in the concentration camp were the Jewish police. They were the people who mistreated the Jews the worst. It wasn't Nazis. I mean, the Nazis were bad. The SS were bad. But they recruited these Jewish folks, and the Jewish folks ran the camps. And he just makes this point like, look, you're going to give up your good stuff. You don't have as much character as you think you do. And it's like, oh, man. Actually, Jordan Peterson talks about that a lot. and he was one of the ones saying you gotta read. He feels like Man's Search for Meaning and the Gulag Archipelago should be required reading for high schools. To just kind of go, look, folks are a lot less good than we think. Down inside there's a bunch of bad stuff and there's a bunch of good stuff, and who knows what comes out.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It makes me think of a couple of more books, but it also makes me think of an idea too that I think is important, and it's one that you learn by reading back through history, where the cringeworthy moments for me as I'm reading back and having an armchair quarterback's attitude, because that's all I can have, is just the importance of mixing vision with courage. Because people can have the vision to do something, but if they don't have the courage to see it through, then what have they really done but put forth another idea that's...
Yeah, that's right. That's Harriet Tubman.
That's Harriet Tubman. I'm thinking of like Elie Wiesel and his book Night. I'm thinking of a great book called Coming of Age in Mississippi. I mean, there's just, and it's all based around diversity, but a lack of acceptance of that, a decision, by tribal tendencies to see things parsed instead of as one. And to not see the things that are common amongst us, but to see the things that separate us, and then to drive wedges into that and further define it, which is just so disappointing. And it makes me think of that idea that you have a vision for something that's great. You've got to have the courage to pursue it, which is why I think we study a guy like flaws and all, like Martin Luther King Jr., because there's a guy with vision. Yeah. There's a guy that really understood the core principles of what we ought to be about. And he had the courage to go after it. Yeah. Gosh, I wish, he set such a good example in that way. Yeah. For so many.
Yeah. Yeah, it's powerful. Interesting guy. For sure. What do you think he would think about the Black Lives Matter stuff? Or the riots, maybe? Because they seem like they're somewhat
He was
different.
no fan of riots.
Yeah.
Having studied a little bit of him, I mean, he was very much on the draw attention to the issue, but don't exacerbate it and give people a reason aside from the issue to find a problem. Keep it focused on what the real thing is, which is, I think at the heart of sort of the pure notion of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is essential in our culture to move us forward and to move us closer to, I think, the vision of what we're supposed to be. Like any movement, there are people on all sides of it that go far right, that go far left, that, and then because the media is set up the way the media is, they draw attention to those fringes. And then because attention is drawn to those things, people read a headline and they determine that the entire thing is defined by that fringe. Yeah. And, how to consume information is such an undertaught thing. Yeah, right. Because you really have to decipher everything. I'll give you a great example of this. It happened a week ago on CNN.com. And we're in the era of the public health crisis and COVID-19 and the pandemic. And there was an article on there where the headline was about a high school graduation where a student at the graduation was diagnosed with COVID. And that's the headline. This sat on their homepage for 2 days. This lived there. Now, when you read the article, 7 paragraphs down, it talks about how the kid went to the event. It was at a drive-in movie theater, and the headline is designed to think I thought drive-ins were safe. This kid went there. He got diagnosed. I guess nothing's safe. That's what the media organization wants you to click on to sell ads, right? Not to be cynical, but that's the truth of the business, right? So 7 paragraphs down, the kid didn't have COVID when he was at the event. And he went to an after party as well where he did not have. And there was no social distancing or anything there. Then they go on a trip. This kid goes on a trip with a bunch of his friends where he does come down with COVID. And now the contact tracing is engaged, and several of the people in that group that went on the trip ended up with it. Now, if you hadn't read the article and you'd read that top line thing, you would think that nothing is safe. I can't even go to a drive-in movie theater. But you clicked on it, and they got to say that male in his 50s clicked on this with a certain income level, and that's going to feed into how we sell ads, right? But the truth of it, the shaping of public perception is, it's not incorrect by the circumstance because of the way the headline was written, but it is deeply and intentionally misleading. And, that we have to look at. We like to look at things. We feel comfortable when things are black and white. But lots of things are gray. And understanding how to interpret the shades of gray is essential to just consuming information in culture.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think this whole First Amendment deal, it's just so shocking to me to see how, the First Amendment, the idea that you have a God-given right, or by the laws of nature, nature's God, or however you want to kind of spell that out, but you have an indelible, endowed right as a human being to speak your mind and listen to other people who speak their mind. And yet it seems like there's such a pressure, there's so much cultural pressure on all kinds of fronts to try to undermine that. And I've seen a number, especially on the college campus, where there's just like, hey, we need to be able to you should be able to speak your mind unless you believe this or that, and then we're going to, squash you. Right. And you're an idiot. So in some ways we have this like, there's like a overcorrection, which maybe is normal in society. But there's like this overcorrection of, we're not going to let you speak your mind unless it fits in this box here, which is
currently
acceptable, which is just, why is anybody surprised by that? And like, hey, that's just gonna keep on happening, whether you have an R or a D or an L or a C or gay or straight or Christian or whatever, right? I mean, we've seen that throughout history, where whatever you have at the top of your box, we're gonna go squash your opinion. We're gonna smash it down.
And which is why you have to be such a guardian of what defines you.
Yeah.
And why I think marketing communications is a good backdrop to explain a lot of times why things are the way they are. Because take a look at the concept of brand. Brand isn't what you think you are. Brand is what you think I am. Brand is perception. And my actions and the information I put out, what I say and do, creates that perception that you interpret through your filter, and that becomes my brand. So why am I not more of a guardian about what I say and do? If I understand the weight and gravity of all of that, I better be choiceful about what it is that I say and do. And, it obviously applies to marketing communications, but I think it applies to personal brand and so much other stuff too. And it goes against, it's anathema to the idea of how our society puts pressures on you to consume information. The thing I hate with a fire of 1,000 suns right now is Quibi. Quibi is like, okay, well, you don't have the time to watch a 22-minute episode of Parks and Recreation. So we're going to distill that down to about 2 minutes and 44 seconds. So you just get hit with the jokes and none of the context, none of the character building, none of the part of the joy of the journey of those characters over time. We're just going to get the thing that you can talk about and write that social media post about or that blog post about. And then you now have license to participate in modern culture because you have consumed enough of this information to appear conversant.
Yeah, it's like a dramatic, it's pornography for drama. It's pointless.
It's cotton candy. It's meaningless.
Yeah.
And you haven't participated in anything.
That's right.
And it's, fortunately, I'm really happy about this. It's doing very badly. And a lot of the initial supporters of it, like Pepsi and some others, are pulling out because they've realized how bad it is. But that doesn't mean that but there's still this like soundbite,
Interesting.
culture that we have that I think it ended up being created, I think, naturally and organically, but we haven't corrected for that yet. It became sort of, you have Edward R. Murrow, you have like certain news people in the United States, and they have 30 minutes of airtime, and they have the time to tell you what the most important things are for you to think about, and then to establish for you the boundaries of those things. There's people that look at it like this, there's people that look at it like this is the core issue. The notion of objectivity in journalism. No one lived that better than Edward R. Murrow. Walter Cronkite's another example, right? But then you have that condensed and distilled down into 30 minutes. And now, as time evolves, there's this interest in news and then local news. And so you're trying to pack more into that 30 minutes. And what you're doing is you're borrowing time away from the depth of understanding of something. It's because you're making trade-offs all along the way. And so over time, what evolves is a soundbite culture where winning that soundbite in that news cycle starts to matter more than anything else. And then when you introduce more channels of communication beyond just the 30-minute news program on radio or TV or whatever it is, you're introducing all these channels. You get all this diverse information out there delivered in different ways, interpreted in different ways, fractured. And now people are grabbing on to a 3-second thing, and they're determining a depth. They're projecting a depth that they haven't researched.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so a couple things is it's interesting to see the media, quote unquote, which is almost as bad as saying white people or black people. Like the media is like a gross oversimplification.
Totally.
Right?
It is, yeah. It's a mischaracterization of the intent.
Yeah. So, but there's this, I guess the commercial media is getting a shorter and shorter or smaller and smaller bits, shorter and shorter pieces of information. While at the same time, you got podcasts, you got YouTube that's like getting expansive.
But these are mechanisms of delivery, right? They're channels. It's one of my favorite interview questions to ask, which is, what's your information diet? And boy, there's a lot of ways to not answer it right. One of the ways is, I read a lot of stuff on Twitter. Cool. That's like saying, where do you get your information? TV.
Yeah, right.
Well, what do you watch on TV? What people do you trust on TV?
Right.
What news organizations do you feel like do a good job at identifying and communicating the right information in the right way? That is more meaningful to me. I follow this newsletter because I like these people, because they believe this thing and that aligns with who I am. I don't care if I disagree with maybe what you consume information-wise, if there's inherent bias in it. But if you understand how information and communication work, I feel pretty good about your understanding of the craft. But a lot of people, especially young people, well, what's your information diet? Well, I read some stuff on Twitter and Instagram. That's like, I TV. Doesn't mean anything.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I had and I won't say his name or the institution, but I think I don't know if I told you about him or not, but president of a college, a local college, major institution around here. And this is years ago, 12 years ago, when I was contracting and I spent the day working at his house. And we started a conversation because I was listening to a conservative talk radio person in my truck as I was doing this job. And he made a negative comment about it. And, and it may or may not. Well, actually, the comment that he made was incorrect. Yeah, very incorrect. And he said, that guy's a racist, which is a pretty serious swipe at somebody without any real evidence, I'm like, well, why do you think he's racist? Oh, he just is. Oh.
That's a good opportunity to apply curiosity.
Yeah. So I said, dude, and I didn't say dude, I said, sir, Mr. X, why do you think that? and this is a guy who had, there's 30,000 students, major institution, doctor, PhD. Why do you think that? You must have some evidence, Well, everybody knows that. Like, well, that's not evidence, that's an opinion, I mean, and so I said, sir, does it change your opinion if you knew that his best friend was black? Would that fact change your feelings? All right, doesn't matter. Okay, all right. And it didn't faze him. Like, so he's still a racist even though his best friend's black? I mean, or his project man, or whatever.
Not to get into the old argument, but yeah, I think people can act different ways.
Yeah.
I absolutely do.
Yeah.
That's the whole study of the revolution. People can definitely hold core truths and project different truths.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I asked him about his media consumption. We started talking about that. And and we had a bit of a, we were kind of chasing our tails a little bit. But one of the things that I took away, I came away from it, I truly was trying to be balanced in my media consumption. And I intentionally, so I'm a political conservative, I suppose. I really more of a libertarian with a small L, probably is the right way to put it. Classic.
Because you don't believe in capital anything.
Well, libertarian with a capital L, like, wants to do away with the treasury and whatever.
It's an activist libertarianism.
Come on, yeah. So
you're the pacifist libertarian.
Well, I'd say like more of a philosophical libertarian and less of a activist libertarian. But anyway, he, as the conversation went on, I'm like, I try really hard to consume media from people I disagree with, and just because I want to make sure I just think that's important. Iron sharpens iron, right? I mean, to kind of like, all right, I don't have this figured out, so I probably should listen to some folks that are like, hey, have you thought about this? No, I haven't. I probably should. And it became crystal freaking clear that this guy never did that. I mean, he kind of was like, I never do that. I'm like, wait, so you don't listen to people, you just, and it was really clear they did. And I'm like, no, that's interesting. Anyway, so I think it's fascinating to come across folks like you, folks like me, folks like other folks who are learning from wide, deep springs.
Yeah, I can't possibly approximate the real circumstances that other people have encountered or endured, right? I can't get that visceral knowledge that way, but I can do my best to study it and try and understand it intellectually, even if I can't get there viscerally. And that, I think, is where it unlocks all the objectivity, all the different perspectives that make life so interesting. You have to have that different point of view. If you become too insular, you're boring and everything passes you.
Yeah. Well, it's been a really great conversation. I enjoyed having you, and I'm glad you're able to be a part of this. So thank you for a couple of... Oh, I was going to tell you, Dan Carlin podcast is a great history podcast.
Add it to my information diet.
Yes. He has these podcasts that are like 14 hours long. I can't remember the...
Yikes.
It's like an audiobook. It's really how I look at it.
Yeah.
I think it's Extreme History, or I can't remember the name of the podcast right now, but Dan Carlin.
See the guy that does the history you didn't learn in history class? Because that's a good thing too. I love that kind of stuff, because there are a lot of conventions that are just taught because they've always been taught.
Yeah.
But they've never been taught truthfully. Like if you really study Christopher Columbus, that guy was a dirtbag.
Yeah, sure.
He's really objectively a lousy guy.
Yeah, sure. And no doubt about all that. And so was Stalin, or so was Marx, or so was, Eisenhower, and so was, blah, blah, blah. So
turns out all people are flawed.
Turns out. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And we ought to teach people how to be a little more objective, perhaps.
And then when to apply grace.
That's right. Yeah. I heard somebody say grace is giving someone time to get it right. Like, oh, that's interesting. Way to look at
It's
that.
interesting, too, because it implies that you know what right looks like.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Or at least to rethink and try it a different way.
Yeah. Well, it's been a really fascinating conversation, and I appreciate you being here. And love your core values,
Thank you.
especially curiosity, as we said. And I'm going to try to hook up with Jeremy Lyle and
Do
get
that.
him connected on here.
It's worth your while.
Yes. All right, buddy. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Episode 006, Josh Gordon, out.